I was holding the deed to a $1.5 million lakefront cottage. It was supposed to be the ultimate retirement gift for my daughter Zoe. I had built my logistics empire from a single rusted truck to a fleet of 500, and this cottage was my way of saying thank you to the family I loved. Then a number I did not know called me. The voice on the other end was a terrified whisper that cut through the silence of my office like a knife. "Don't sign the company over. Run." I thought it was a cruel joke and almost hung up. But then I looked across the table at my son-in-law, and for the first time I saw the predator behind his smile. What I discovered next left me in shock and forced me to burn down everything I had built just to save my dignity. Before I continue this story of betrayal and cold revenge, let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family member who mistook your kindness for weakness. The air conditioning in the glass-walled conference room hummed with a low, menacing vibration that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing pain in my left knee. 71 years of life and 40 years of driving heavy haulers had left my joints grinding like gears with no oil, but I sat straight in the leather executive chair. I refused to show weakness. Not today. Across the mahogany table sat the board of directors, men and women in suits that cost more than my first 3 trucks combined. But my eyes were fixed on Gavin, my son-in-law. He was 35 years old, a white man with an MBA and soft hands that had never changed a tire in the snow. He was smiling that polished corporate smile that never quite reached his eyes. He slid the document toward me. It was the power of attorney granting him full, unrestricted control over Barnes Logistics. "Come on, Dad," Gavin said, his voice smooth like oil on water. "The cake is melting and the shareholders are waiting for the toast. Just sign the line and you can finally go fishing. You deserve it." My daughter Zoe sat next to him. She was checking her phone, barely looking at me. I had paid for her art degree, her apartment, and her wedding, but now she looked at me like I was in task on her to-do list that was taking too long. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen. It felt colder than steel in my hand. The room was silent. I could hear the scratching of the pen tip hovering over the paper. This company was my blood, my sweat, and the legacy of a black man who started with nothing in a world that wanted him to fail. Handing it over felt like signing my own death certificate. Gavin leaned in closer, invading my personal space. His cologne was overpowering. "Dad," he whispered low enough that the shareholders couldn't hear. "Don't make this awkward. We have already ordered the champagne. Think about your legacy. You are tired. Let me carry the load now." His words were framed as concern, but his tone was a threat. He was telling me that I was obsolete, that I was just an old man in the way of his progress. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from an instinct I had not felt since my days driving solo through dangerous routes in the 80s. My gut was screaming that something was wrong. But I looked at Zoe. She finally looked up and gave me a tight, impatient smile. For her, I told myself. I am doing this for her. I lowered the pen to the paper. The ink began to bleed into the fiber of the page. Suddenly, the phone in my breast pocket buzzed against my ribs. It was a jarring, violent vibration that made me jerk my hand back. A blot of black ink stained the signature line. "Sorry," I muttered, pulling the phone out. Gavin's smile twitched. A flash of irritation crossed his face before he smoothed it back over. "Turn it off, Dad," he said, his voice a little tighter. "We are in the middle of a ceremony." I looked at the screen. No name. Just a string of digits I did not recognize. I moved my thumb to decline the call, but my old fingers, stiff from the cold air conditioning, slipped. I hit answer instead. I brought the phone to my ear, intending to hang up immediately. "Mr. Barnes," a voice whispered. It was female, breathless, and distorted by the sound of wind rushing past the microphone. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice gruff. "Don't sign." The voice hissed, urgent and terrified. "He has sold you out. He shorted the stocks. If you sign that paper, you are going to prison for his debt. Run." The line went dead before I could ask another question. I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The voice sounded familiar. It triggered a memory deep in my brain, something from the warehouse floor or maybe the break room, but I couldn't place it. It was the voice of a ghost. I slowly lowered the phone. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a piston firing out of rhythm. "Everything okay, Elle?" one of the shareholders asked, looking at my pale face. I looked at Gavin. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the company lawyer, a man named Sterling, and he winked. It was a subtle, quick motion, barely a flicker of an eyelid, but I saw it. It was the wink of a conspirator, the wink of a man who had just pulled off the perfect heist. The woman on the phone was right. This wasn't a retirement party. It was a slaughter, and I was the cattle. Dad Gavin said, his voice losing its softness. The pen. Pick it up. I looked at the document. Power of attorney. If I signed that Gavin could do anything, he could sell the assets, take out loans in my name, and leave me with nothing but the liability. He shorted the stocks. That meant he was betting on the company to fail. He wanted Barnes Logistics to crash so he could cash out on the destruction of my life's work. I need a minute, I said, pushing the chair back. My knees popped loudly in the silence. No, Gavin said, standing up. He was no longer whispering. We don't have a minute. The schedule is tight. Sit down and sign the paper, Eldridge. He called me Eldridge, not Dad, not Mr. Barnes. The mask was slipping. I saw Zoe reach out and touch Gavin's arm, not to stop him, but to calm him down, as if managing a difficult child. She knew. My own daughter knew. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, insufficient to fill my lungs. I needed to get out. I needed to find out who called me. But if I walked out now, Gavin would use his power on the board to vote me out for incompetence. He would say I was senile. I needed a reason to leave that they could not argue with. I clenched my left hand into a fist and pressed it against my chest. I let out a groan, a deep guttural sound of pain that I didn't have to fake entirely because my heart was truly breaking. Dad Zoe stood up her chair, scraping the floor. I slumped forward, letting my forehead hit the cool mahogany table. My medical records were no secret. Everyone knew I had high blood pressure. Call 911, a shareholder shouted. I watched Gavin through the slit of my half-closed eyes. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't rush to my side. He stood there staring at the unsigned document with a look of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked at the lawyer, then at me. He is fine, Gavin said, his voice cold and devoid of empathy. He is just having a panic attack. Give him some water. He needs to sign this before he leaves. The room went deadly silent. Even the greedy shareholders looked uncomfortable. A son-in-law refusing medical help to a dying man was too much even for them. He is clutching his chest. Gavin, a board member, stood up. I am calling the paramedics. Gavin grabbed the pen and jammed it into my trembling hand. Sign it, he hissed into my ear, his breath hot and smelling of coffee and deceit. Sign it, and then you can die for all I care. Just put your name on the line. I mustered every ounce of strength I had left in my 71-year-old body. I didn't sign. Instead, I spastically jerked my arm and swept the papers, the inkwell, and the water pitcher off the table. The glass pitcher shattered on the floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot. I let my body slide out of the chair and collapsed onto the carpet. Oh my God, Zoe screamed, finally acting the part of the concerned daughter, though I wondered if she was worried about me or the delay in her inheritance. Chaos erupted. People were running. Someone was loosening my tie. Through the forest of legs and the haze of my performance, I locked eyes with Gavin one last time. He wasn't looking at me with concern. He was looking at me with the eyes of a hunter who just watched his trap fail. He knew I was faking, and I knew he was a monster. As the paramedics loaded me onto the stretcher, masking my face with an oxygen mask, I saw Gavin pick up the unsigned power of attorney from the wet floor. He crumpled it in his fist. I had bought myself 24 hours. But as the ambulance doors closed, shutting out the sight of my treacherous family, I knew the war had just begun. I had to find the owner of that voice. I had to go back to the streets where I started. I closed my eyes and let the siren wail, plotting my next move. I was Eldridge Barnes, and I was not going down without a fight. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and feigned chest pains, but the moment I stepped back into my own home, the atmosphere shifted from medical emergency to maximum security prison. The paramedics had barely left the driveway when my daughter Zoe closed the heavy oak front door. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed through the foyer, like the cell door of a penitentiary. I walked towards the living room, intending to pour myself a drink to calm my racing heart, but Zoe stepped in my path. Her face was no longer the mask of a worried daughter. It was the cold, calculated face of a jailer. "You need to rest, Dad," she said, holding out her hand. "Give me your phone." I stared at her hand. It was perfectly manicured, the nails painted a soft pink that cost more than my first week of wages back in the 80s. "Why do you need my phone, Zoe?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The doctor said no stress, she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. No business calls, no news, just sleep. Gavin and I will handle everything. She didn't wait for me to offer it. She reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. It was an invasion of privacy so casual and arrogant that it left me breathless. Before I could protest, she walked over to the landline on the mahogany desk. With a sharp yank, she pulled the cord from the wall. The plastic jack snapped. It wasn't just unplugged. It was broken. There, she said, dropping the cord onto the expensive Persian rug. Now you can focus on getting better. We will bring you dinner in your room. Do not come down. We have a lot of paperwork to sort through for the transition tomorrow. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving me standing in the silence of the house I had paid for, the house that was now my cage. I listened until I heard her footsteps disappear into the east wing where she and Gavin stayed. I looked at the grandfather clock. It was only 7 in the evening. They thought they had cut me off from the world. They thought Eldridge Barnes was just a helpless old man who needed a screen to communicate. They forgot that before the internet and smartphones, I ran a logistics empire with nothing but a notepad and grit. I limped up the stairs, my left knee throbbing in rhythm with my anger. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I didn't lie down. I went straight to the closet. Behind the rows of bespoke suits that I wore to board meetings, there was an old, beat-up red toolbox. It was the same toolbox I kept in the cabin of my first Mack truck 40 years ago. I dragged it out, the metal scraping quietly against the floor. My hands trembled slightly as I popped the rusty latches. Inside, amidst the wrenches and screwdrivers, lay my fail-safe, a Motorola flip phone, a burner. I had kept it charged and hidden for 10 years, ever since the day I realized that corporate espionage was a real threat. I flipped it open. The small screen glowed green, battery full, signal strong. I sat on the edge of the bed and dialed a number I had memorized decades ago. "Benny Pickup," I whispered into the receiver. Benny was a man who lived in the shadows. He used to rig the radios for my trucks to avoid police scanners back in the day. Now he was a ghost in the machine, a freelance surveillance expert who operated out of a basement in the garment district. The line clicked. "L, I thought you were retired." Benny's voice sounded like gravel in a blender. "Not yet," I said. "I need a trace, Benny, and I need it fast. Give me the digits." I recited the number that had called me during the meeting, the number that had whispered, "Run." "Hold on," Benny said. "I hear keys clacking in the background. This isn't a standard trace, L. This number is bouncing off 3 different towers. It is a burner just like yours. Whoever called you did not want to be found. Find them, Benny. My life depends on it." I waited. The silence in the room was heavy. I sat there in the dark, clutching the flip phone like a lifeline. Suddenly I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. It was the creak of a floorboard outside my bedroom door. The house was old, and I knew every groan it made. That specific creak meant someone was standing right outside the threshold. I stopped breathing. I could see the shadow under the door blocked by 2 feet. It was Gavin. I knew his stance. He was standing there listening. I slowly lowered the phone to the mattress, covering the glow of the screen with my hand. I didn't move a muscle. If he came in now, if he saw the phone, the game was over. He would drug me or worse. I watched the brass doorknob. It turned slowly, just a fraction of an inch. He was testing the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had faced union busters and hijackers in my time, but the fear of my own son-in-law standing outside my door was a different kind of terror. It was intimate and cold. After what felt like an hour, the doorknob turned back. The shadow moved. The floorboard creaked again as he walked away. He was checking to see if the old man was asleep. He was checking to see if the prisoner was secure. Benny's voice came back on the line, making me jump. "L, you there?" I lifted the phone. "I am here. Did you find it?" "Yeah, but you are not going to like it," Benny said. "The signal originated from a prepaid device activated 2 days ago. The last ping was 20 minutes ago. It is stationary. Where I demanded. Sector 4, the South Side Junkyard, the one near the old chemical plant." My stomach dropped. That was dangerous territory. It was where stolen cars went to disappear and where bodies were never found. "Thanks, Benny." "Don't go there," Benny warned. "That place is a graveyard." I hung up and checked the time. It was midnight. The house was silent, but I knew Gavin and Zoe were likely celebrating their victory downstairs or plotting the final takeover. I couldn't leave yet. I had to wait for the witching hour. I sat in the dark for 3 hours. I watched the rain start to streak against the window pane. At 3 in the morning, the storm was in full force. Thunder rattled the window frames, which was perfect. The noise would cover my escape. I didn't use the stairs. My knees would protest, but I had to go out the window. I opened the sash, and the cold wind hit me wet and sharp. I swung my legs over the sill, finding the sturdy trellis that supported the ivy. 40 years ago, I climbed this to sneak into the house when I lost my keys. Tonight, I was climbing down to save my life. I descended slowly, step by painful step. The rain soaked through my pajamas instantly. When my boots hit the soft mud of the garden, I didn't stop to rest. I moved through the shadows, avoiding the security cameras I had paid to install. I knew their blind spots. I made my way to the detached garage at the back of the property. This was my sanctuary. Inside, parked under a dusty tarp, was my pride and joy. A 1998 Ford F-150. It wasn't pretty. It had dents and rust spots, but the engine was a beast I had rebuilt myself. I pulled the tarp off. The smell of old leather and gasoline filled my nose. It was the smell of freedom. I climbed in. The key was under the visor, just where I always left it. I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that sounded like thunder. I held my breath, waiting for lights to flick on in the main house, but the storm outside was louder. I rolled the garage door up manually to avoid the noise of the electric motor and backed the truck out into the rain. I didn't turn on the headlights until I was a mile down the road. The drive to the south side was a journey back in time. As I left the manicured lawns of my neighborhood, the streets became darker and narrower. The pavement turned into potholes. The streetlights flickered. This was the city I came from, the city I had tried to escape. I reached the junkyard gates at 4 in the morning. The chain-link fence was topped with razor wire. The gate was slightly ajar. I killed the headlights and let the truck roll forward in neutral tires crunching softly on the gravel. The yard was a labyrinth of twisted metal. Stacks of crushed cars loomed like monsters in the dark. The rain hammered on the roof of my truck. I pulled the burner phone out to check Benny's coordinates. Sector 4 was at the far end near the crusher. I parked the truck behind a stack of old tires and grabbed the flashlight from the glove box. I stepped out into the mud. The smell here was metallic and pungent, oil rust and decay. I walked through the maze, sweeping the beam of my light across the wreckage. My heart was in my throat. Why would the caller be here? Why would a witness hide in a place like this? Then I saw it. In the middle of a clearing sat a small sedan. It had been through the crusher. It was a cube of metal compacted to half its original size, but it hadn't been processed completely. The roof was flattened down to the seats. I approached it slowly, the beam of my flashlight shaking in my hand. The driver's side window was shattered. I shined the light inside. The space was claustrophobic. The dashboard was smashed into the front seat, and there, wedged between the twisted steering column and the ruin of the seat, was a phone. The screen was cracked, but it was still glowing faintly. It was the source of the signal. I reached in, ignoring the jagged glass that cut into my sleeve. My fingers brushed against something wet and sticky on the upholstery. I pulled my hand back and shined the light on my fingers. It was red. Fresh blood. Someone had been in this car when it was crushed, or they had been beaten here and left for dead. I forced myself to look closer into the wreckage. I needed to know who. I needed to know if the voice that warned me was gone forever. I leaned further in, and that is when I saw it. Caught on the jagged edge of the gear shift was a piece of fabric. It was a scarf, a yellow wool scarf with a distinct pattern of small embroidered sunflowers. I stopped breathing. The rain seemed to stop. The world narrowed down to that yellow piece of cloth. I knew that scarf. I had bought it 10 years ago at a Christmas market. I had wrapped it in a box and given it to the woman who cleaned my office every night for 20 years. Hattie. The voice on the phone wasn't a stranger. It was Hattie, the quiet, 65-year-old woman who emptied my trash cans and watered my plants. The woman who knew every secret of Barnes Logistics because she was invisible to everyone except me. Gavin hadn't just silenced a whistleblower. He had tried to kill Hattie. A wave of nausea hit me. Hattie was the only person in the company who refused to take a pension cut when times were hard. She was the one who brought me homemade soup when my wife died. And now her scarf was soaked in blood in a crushed car in a junkyard. I grabbed the bloody phone from the wreck and shoved it into my pocket. I grabbed the scarf too. This wasn't just evidence. This was a declaration of war. Suddenly, a floodlight blinded me from the top of the crane tower. A siren wailed, cutting through the storm. "Hey, you down there!" a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. I didn't wait to introduce myself. I scrambled back to my truck, slipping in the mud. I heard the sound of dogs barking. Dobermans, guard dogs. I threw myself into the cab of the Ford and slammed the door just as a black shape slammed against the window, snarling and snapping. I gunned the engine, spinning the tires in the mud before finding traction. I sped towards the gate, the truck bouncing violently over the debris. In the rearview mirror, I saw men running towards cars. Gavin's men. They had been watching the bait. I had the evidence. I knew the victim, but now they knew I was awake. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now it was a high-speed chase, and I had nowhere left to hide. I drove my battered Ford truck under the overpass and killed the engine in the shadow of a derelict warehouse. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from the adrenaline that was slowly turning into a cold, hard rage. The rain hammered against the roof of the cab, creating a deafening rhythm that matched the pounding in my temples. I pulled the blood-stained phone out of my pocket. It was a piece of plastic and glass, but right now it felt heavier than a gold bar. I used a rag from the glove box to wipe away the red smear on the screen. It was Hattie's blood, the woman who had made me coffee every morning for 20 years, the woman who was now a ghost in the wind because of my family. I unlocked the phone. There was one audio file saved in the recordings folder. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. I pressed play and turned the volume up. The speaker crackled, and then I heard a voice that made my stomach turn. It was Gavin, my son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into my home. The audio quality was poor, likely recorded from inside a pocket or a purse, but the words were crystal clear. "You are worrying too much about the old man," Gavin said. His voice was slurred, slightly arrogant and relaxed. "He thinks he is leaving a legacy. I am just liquidating a corpse." There was a pause, and then another voice spoke. It sounded like one of his frat boy friends from the country club. "What about the pension fund? The drivers will riot if they find out it is empty. Let them riot." Gavin laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. "By the time they figure out the money is gone, I will be in the Caymans. I took the entire pension pot and dumped it into that new crypto exchange. It is already up 40%. If it crashes, who cares? Let them eat dog food. They are just truck drivers. They are replaceable." I stopped the recording. I felt bile rise in my throat. I rolled down the window and spat into the rain. It wasn't just theft. It was a massacre. That pension fund was the life savings of 500 men and women. Men like Big Mike, who drove through blizzards to deliver medicine. Women like Sarah, who was a single mother driving double shifts to put her kids through college. I had promised them security. I had shaken their hands and looked them in the eye. And Gavin had taken their future and gambled it on internet money like it was a game of poker. He called them replaceable. He called me a corpse. I replayed the last sentence. Let them eat dog food. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. This wasn't just about my daughter or my house anymore. This was war. Gavin wasn't a businessman. He was a parasite, and I was the exterminator. But the recording wasn't enough. A good lawyer could argue it was a deep fake or taken out of context. I needed the witness. I needed Hattie. I started the truck. The engine roared to life, a beast waking up from a slumber. I knew where Hattie lived. She lived in the darker part of the city, the place where the streetlights were broken and the police sirens were just background noise. It was the place I grew up in and the place I had worked my whole life to get out of. But tonight I was going back. The drive took 20 minutes. The neighborhood was a maze of crumbling brick tenements and overflowing dumpsters. I parked the truck 2 blocks away to avoid drawing attention. I pulled my hood up and walked through the rain. My knee was screaming in pain with every step, but I forced myself to walk upright. I wasn't a victim. I was a man on a mission. Hattie lived in building 4B on the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale urine. The graffiti on the walls was a mix of gang signs and desperate cries for help. I reached her door. The paint was peeling, revealing the rotting wood underneath. I knocked 3 times. A specific rhythm. Knock, pause, knock, knock. It was a signal we used at the warehouse when the back door was locked. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. Hattie. It is me. It is Elle. Open the door. I heard a shuffling sound inside, then the scrape of a chair against the floor. Go away, a voice screamed from inside. It was shrill and terrified. I have a gun. I will shoot. I knew Hattie didn't have a gun. Hattie was a church-going woman who wouldn't hurt a fly. But fear can make people do desperate things. Hattie, listen to me, I said, leaning close to the doorframe. I found the car. I have the phone. I know what he did. I am not here to hurt you. I am here to end this. The silence stretched out. I could hear her breathing heavy and ragged on the other side of the wood. You are with him, she sobbed. You signed the papers. You gave him the power. I didn't sign anything, Hattie. I said, my voice firm but gentle. I walked out. I am fighting him. But I can't do it without you. Remember the soup, Hattie. Remember the tomato soup you brought me when Martha died. You told me that grief is just love with nowhere to go. Well, my anger is justice with nowhere to go. Open the door. There was a long pause. Then I heard the sound of multiple locks being undone. The chain rattled. The deadbolt clicked. The door creaked open just a crack. One eye stared out at me wide with terror. In her hand, she didn't hold a gun. She held a long, rusted kitchen knife. Her hand was shaking so violently the tip of the blade was vibrating against the doorframe. Mr. Barnes, she whispered. It is just Elle, I said, holding my empty hands up. Put the knife down, Hattie. She looked at me, looked at my wet clothes, looked at the mud on my boots. She saw the truth in my eyes. The knife clattered to the floor. She pulled the door open and collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I guided her to the worn-out sofa in the small living room. The apartment was tiny but spotless. Pictures of her grandchildren covered every surface. I went to the kitchen and poured her a glass of water. Her hands were still shaking too much to hold it, so I helped her drink. Why did you run, Hattie? I asked, sitting on the chair opposite her. Why didn't you come to me? She looked at the picture of a young boy in a graduation gown on the mantelpiece. That is Marcus, she said, her voice trembling. My grandson. He is the first one in our family to go to college. He is a good boy. I nodded. I knew Marcus. I had helped pay for his books. Gavin came to me 3 days ago, Hattie said, tears streaming down her face. He found me in the file room. I was filing the logs he thought he had destroyed. He didn't know I kept copies. He grabbed me by the throat, Mr. Barnes. He pinned me against the wall. His eyes were like a shark, dead, cold. I clenched my fists. The image of that man touching Hattie made my blood boil. He told me that if I showed those logs to anyone, Marcus would have an accident, she continued. He said accidents happen all the time. A car crash, a fire, a stray bullet. He knew where Marcus lived. He knew his schedule. She looked at me with eyes full of shame. I was scared, Mr. Barnes. I am an old woman. I can't fight him. So I ran. I threw my phone in the car, and I ran. I thought if I disappeared, he would leave Marcus alone. He won't leave anyone alone, Hattie, I said. Men like Gavin don't stop until they consume everything. Running only makes him bolder. We have to stop him. But how, she asked. He has the lawyers. He has the money. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the blood-stained phone. We have his voice, I said, but we need more. You said you had logs. Copies. Where are they? Hattie hesitated. She looked at the door as if expecting Gavin to burst in at any moment. Then she took a deep breath. She stood up and walked to the small kitchenette. She reached behind the refrigerator and pulled out a loose brick from the wall. From the hollow space, she retrieved a black notebook. It was a standard-issue logbook, the kind truck drivers used before everything went digital. The cover was worn and stained with grease. She handed it to me. Her hands were steady now. He thinks he deleted everything from the server, she said. He thinks he wiped the GPS data, but he forgot that I checked the odometer readings every morning manually. That is my job. I opened the book. The pages were filled with Hattie's neat handwriting. Dates, times, truck numbers, odometer readings. I started to read, and what I saw made the blood drain from my face. These trucks, I said, pointing to a series of entries highlighted in red. Truck 404, Truck 409. These trucks are supposed to be out of service. They are marked for maintenance. They run at night, Hattie said quietly. Between midnight and 4 in the morning. They leave the depot empty and they come back empty. But the mileage doesn't match a local run. They are going 200 miles round trip. Where are they going, I asked. To the old quarry, she said. The one near the state line. And what are they carrying? Hattie looked down at her hands. They are not carrying freight, Mr. Barnes. They are carrying barrels. Yellow barrels with the biohazard symbol. I felt the room spin. Biohazard. Medical waste. He is undercutting the competition by 50%, she explained, because he isn't paying for disposal. He is dumping toxic medical waste into the quarry, into the groundwater. I slammed the book shut. This was worse than embezzlement. This was worse than fraud. This was an environmental catastrophe. If this got out, Barnes, logistics wouldn't just go bankrupt. We would be monsters. We would be the company that poisoned a town to save a few dollars. He is charging the hospitals full price for disposal, Hattie added. And he is pocketing the difference. That is where the money for his cars and his vacations comes from. It is dirty money, Mr. Barnes. It is poison money. I stood up, I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked street. I had built this company to move food, to move medicine, to move the things that people needed to live, and Gavin had turned it into a vehicle for death. I turned back to Hattie. "Get your coat," I said. "Where are we going?" she asked, fear creeping back into her eyes. "We are not staying here," I said. "It is not safe. Gavin knows you are alive. He knows the car wasn't empty. He will come looking." I picked up the black notebook. "This book is the nail in his coffin, Hattie. But we need to make sure we survive long enough to hammer it in. I am taking you to a safe house," I told her, "a place he doesn't know about, a place that isn't on any deed or any database." Hattie looked at the picture of her grandson one last time. Then she nodded. She went to the closet and put on her coat. She grabbed her purse and walked to the door. She stopped and looked at me. "Mr. Barnes," she said, "you need to know one more thing." "What is it?" "Zoe knows," she said. The name hung in the air like a curse. "My daughter." "I saw her," Hattie whispered. "I saw her in the office with him when they were planning the routes. She was looking at the maps. She asked him if the quarry was deep enough. She knows." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, real this time, not feigned. My daughter wasn't just a bystander. She wasn't just a spoiled brat who liked expensive things. She was an accomplice. She had looked at a map of a quarry and calculated how much poison they could hide in it. I took a deep breath and pushed the pain down into the dark place where I kept my grief. "Let's go, Hattie," I said, opening the door. We walked out into the dark hallway. The notebook was tucked inside my jacket against my heart. The recording was in my pocket. I had the evidence. I had the witness. And now I had the terrible burden of the truth. The drive to the safe house would take an hour. It was a hunting cabin I had bought 30 years ago under a fake name for cash. No one knew about it, not even my late wife. It was off the grid. No phone lines, no internet. As we drove through the rain, I looked at Hattie sleeping in the passenger seat, exhausted by fear. I looked at the black notebook on the dashboard. Gavin thought he was playing a game of chess. He thought he had taken all my pieces, but he forgot that a pawn can take down a king if it makes it to the end of the board, and I was about to flip the whole table over. Tomorrow I would initiate the endgame. Tomorrow I would turn the hunter into the hunted, but for tonight we just had to disappear. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in days I could see the path clearly. It was a path of scorched earth, and I was bringing the fire. The drive back to this mansion was the longest 40 minutes of my life. I dropped Hattie off at the safe house deep in the woods, leaving her with a shotgun and a promise that I would return. Now I was driving back into the belly of the beast. The sun was just beginning to bruise the horizon with shades of purple and gray, signaling the start of the day that would decide my fate. My knee ached with a dull, persistent throb, a reminder of the cold rain and the years I had spent climbing in and out of cabs. I parked the truck in the garage, wiping the mud from the pedals with a rag, trying to erase the evidence of my excursion. I knew the cameras were off because I had looped the feed before I left, but physical evidence was harder to hide. I opened the back door to the kitchen as quietly as I could. The house was silent, or so I thought. I took 2 steps onto the marble floor, and the light in the living room clicked on. It was a single lamp casting long, distorted shadows across the hallway. Sitting in my favorite armchair facing the door was Gavin. He was wearing a silk robe and holding a tumbler of amber liquid that looked like my expensive scotch. He didn't look tired. He looked like a predator who had been waiting by a waterhole all night. "Good morning, Eldridge," Gavin said. His voice was smooth, devoid of sleep, but sharp around the edges. "You are up early, or rather, you are out late." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain impassive. I channeled the stoicism of a man who had stared down union busters and highway bandits. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice raspy. "Old habits. The rain wakes me up." Gavin took a slow sip of the scotch. He stood up and walked towards me. He wasn't wearing slippers. His bare feet made no sound on the floor. He stopped 3 feet away, invading my personal space. His eyes scanned me from head to toe. He looked at my damp jacket. He looked at my tired eyes. And then his gaze dropped to my boots. I had wiped them, but I had missed a spot near the heel. A clump of reddish clay, the kind specific to the South Side junkyards, clung to the leather. "Where did you go, Eldridge?" he asked. "And don't tell me you went for a drive. You smell like industrial grease and ozone." I looked him dead in the eye. "I went to see Martha. I lied." Gavin paused. "Martha, my wife. She had been dead for 5 years. At 4 in the morning, he asked, skepticism dripping from his words. In a thunderstorm. "I miss her," I said, letting a tremor of genuine grief enter my voice. It wasn't hard. I missed her every day, especially now when I was surrounded by wolves. I went to the cemetery. I needed to talk to her before I signed the papers today. I needed her blessing. Gavin stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. He was calculating. He was trying to decide if I was a senile old man lost in grief or a threat. He looked at the mud again. The cemetery had red clay, too. It was a plausible lie. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That is touching," he said. "But you should be careful. A man your age shouldn't be wandering around in the dark. You might slip, you might fall, and never get up." It was a threat. Plain and simple. "I will be careful," I said, stepping past him. "I am going to shower. I need to wash off the mud." "Go ahead," Gavin said to my back. "Zoe is making breakfast. We have a big day ahead of us. Don't take too long. We don't want you to be late for your own retirement." I walked up the stairs, feeling his eyes drilling holes into my spine. He suspected something. I had bought a little time with the lie about Martha, but the clock was ticking faster now. I needed to act before he connected the dots. I took a shower, letting the hot water scald my skin, trying to wash away the feeling of Gavin's proximity. When I came downstairs an hour later, dressed in a fresh suit, the kitchen smelled of bacon and fresh coffee. It was a domestic scene that looked perfect on the surface. Zoe was at the stove flipping pancakes. She looked beautiful, the image of the daughter I had raised and loved. But now all I could see was the woman Hattie described, the woman looking at maps of a quarry to hide poison. "Morning, Dad," Zoe said, turning around with a bright plastic smile. "You look better. Did you sleep well?" I sat at the table. Gavin was already eating, reading the financial news on his tablet. "I slept fine." I lied again. Zoe brought a plate of food and set it down in front of me. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic cup. Inside was a single pill. "Here," she said. "Don't forget your blood pressure medicine." Dr. Sterling called in a refill. I looked at the pill. For 10 years, my blood pressure medication had been a small white tablet. This pill was blue. It was an oval shape I didn't recognize. "This isn't my medicine," I said, leaving it on the table. "Mine is white." Zoe didn't blink. "The pharmacy changed suppliers, Dad. It is the generic version. Same formula, just a different color. Take it. You need to be calm for the gala tonight." I looked at Gavin. He wasn't reading. He was watching me over the top of his tablet. They were both watching me. The air in the kitchen felt heavy. "Okay," I said. I picked up the pill. I picked up my glass of orange juice. I brought the cup to my lips. I threw the pill into my mouth and took a large gulp of juice. But I didn't swallow. I let the pill slide under my tongue, a trick I had learned from a driver who used to fake taking stay-awake pills during inspections. I swallowed the juice and opened my mouth slightly to show it was empty. "Good," Zoe said, patting my shoulder. Her touch felt like ice. "Now eat up." I forced myself to eat 2 bites of pancake, then stood up. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to use the restroom." I walked calmly out of the kitchen. The moment I was behind the closed door of the powder room, I spit the blue pill into a tissue. It had started to dissolve slightly, tasting bitter and metallic. I wrapped it carefully and put it in my pocket. I needed to know what they were feeding me. I needed to be sure. I waited 10 minutes, flushed the toilet, and went back out. "I am going to run a quick errand," I announced. "I need to pick up my tuxedo from the dry cleaners for tonight." "I will send the driver," Gavin said instantly. "No," I said firmly. "I want to drive. It clears my head. And I want to make sure the fit is right. I will be back in an hour." Gavin looked at Zoe. She shrugged. "Let him go," she said. "The pill will kick in soon anyway. He won't get far." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The pill will kick in. I drove straight to Dr. Sterling's private clinic. Jim Sterling had been my friend since high school. He was the only doctor I trusted. I burst into his office without an appointment. "Jim, I need you to run a test," I said, placing the half-dissolved blue pill on his desk. "Right now." Jim looked at my frantic face and didn't ask questions. He took the pill to his lab. I paced the waiting room, my hands shaking. 10 minutes later, Jim came back. His face was pale. "Elle, where did you get this?" he asked. "Zoe gave it to me," I said. "She said it was for my blood pressure." Jim slammed the file down on the desk. "This isn't for blood pressure, Elle. This is a high-dose antipsychotic. It is used for severe schizophrenia patients in state wards. It is a chemical restraint." "What does it do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jim looked me in the eye. "In this dosage, it causes confusion, memory loss, lethargy, and compliance. If you took this every day for a week, you wouldn't know your own name. You would sign anything anyone put in front of you just to make the fog go away. Elle, they are trying to lobotomize you." I sat down heavily in the chair. My own daughter. She wasn't just stealing my money, she was stealing my mind. She was willing to erase her own father to protect her lifestyle. The betrayal was complete. There was no going back now. I stood up. "Thanks, Jim. Keep that report. I will need it for the police." I drove back to the house. The rage was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I was done being the victim. It was time to be the CEO again. When I got back, the driveway was empty. Gavin's sports car was gone. It was Friday morning, golf day. He never missed his tea time at 10, even when the company was burning. He was arrogant. He thought the pill had neutralized me. He thought I was wandering around confused somewhere. I entered the house. Zoe was in the garden talking on the phone, likely planning the gala. I slipped past the hallway and went straight to Gavin's home office. The door was locked. I didn't panic. I took a paperclip from the hall table and bent it. I had unlocked more trailer hitches and padlocks than Gavin had hot dinners. The lock clicked open in 10 seconds. I stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and expensive cigars. I went to his desk. His computer was asleep. I woke it up. Password protected. Of course, but I didn't need his password. Not yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive Benny had given me. It was a keylogger with a boot override. I plugged it into the back of the tower. I restarted the machine. The screen flickered. A command prompt appeared, scrolling lines of white text on black. I wasn't a hacker, but I knew logistics. I knew how to follow a trail. Benny had set up the script to bypass the login and mirror the hard drive. I watched the progress bar. 20%, 50%. I heard the front door open downstairs. I froze. Gavin wasn't supposed to be back for 4 hours. "Honey, I forgot my clubs." Gavin's voice echoed from the foyer. I cursed under my breath. I looked at the screen. 70%. I can't stop it now. If I pulled the drive, the data would be corrupted. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. He was coming up. I looked around the room. There was nowhere to hide. If he found me here with his computer hacked, the violence would start right now, and I wasn't ready. Think Eldridge. Think. I grabbed a bottle of scotch from his shelf and a glass. I poured a drink and splashed some on my shirt. I sat in his leather chair, spun it around to face the window, and slumped forward, feigning the lethargy Jim had described. The doorknob turned. Gavin walked in. "What the hell?" he said, stopping in his tracks. I turned the chair slowly. My eyes were half closed, my mouth slightly open. I let the glass dangle from my hand. I was looking for this bathroom. I slurred, mimicking the effects of the drug. I found the whiskey. Good whiskey. Gavin stared at me. He looked at the computer screen. The monitor had gone into sleep mode just seconds before he entered. The USB drive was hidden in the back. He laughed. A cruel, dismissive laugh. "Look at you," he said, shaking his head. "Pathetic." The great Eldridge Barnes drunk at 10 in the morning. He walked over and grabbed the bottle from my hand. "Get out of my chair, old man. Go sleep it off. You are embarrassing yourself." I stumbled up, leaning on the desk for support. I grabbed the edge of the desk right near the back of the computer. As I pretended to lose my balance, my hand brushed the back of the tower and yanked the USB drive out. I palmed it instantly. "Sorry," I mumbled. "Just tired. So tired." "Go to your room," Gavin commanded. I shambled out of the room, playing the part of the broken, drugged old man. My heart was racing so fast I thought I would have a stroke. Once I was in my room, I locked the door and plugged the USB into my old laptop I kept hidden in the toolbox. I opened the files. I didn't look at the emails. I went straight to the bank transfers. I found it. A wire transfer dated 2 days ago, $1.5 million. The money I had set aside for the lake house. The money I had saved for 40 years. It wasn't in the company account. It wasn't in Gavin's local account. It had been transferred to a shell company called Phoenix Holdings in the Cayman Islands. But that wasn't the worst part. I scrolled down. There was another transfer, $500,000, from the driver's pension fund, and another, $200,000, from the maintenance budget. He was draining the company dry. He wasn't just stealing the profit, he was stealing the bone and marrow of Barnes Logistics. I looked at the date of the next scheduled transfer, today, at 5 p.m., 2 hours before the gala. He was planning to transfer the remaining assets, the trucks, the warehouses, the land, the moment I signed the power of attorney. He was going to leave us with nothing but debt and toxic waste. I sat back clutching the USB drive. I had the proof. I had the gun. Now I just needed to pull the trigger. The gala was in 6 hours. Gavin thought he was walking into a coronation. He didn't know he was walking into an execution. I changed my shirt. I washed the scotch off my skin. I looked in the mirror. The tired old man was gone. The founder was back. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the head of the drivers' union. Big Mike. Mike, I said when he answered, gather the boys and tell them to bring their trucks. We are going to a party. What kind of party? Mike asked, his voice suspicious. The kind where we take out the trash, I said. Meet me at the rendezvous point. And Mike, bring tire irons. We might need to open some doors. I hung up. The danger wasn't approaching anymore. It was here. And I was the danger. I parked my truck in the lot of Sonny's Diner. The neon sign was flickering just like it had for 30 years. This was the place where I used to bring Zoe after her piano recitals. It was the place where we celebrated her high school graduation, and the place where she told me she had been accepted into art school. I looked at the red vinyl booths through the window and felt a heavy stone settle in my gut. I wasn't walking in to celebrate today. I was walking in to give my only child one last chance to save her soul. I checked my pocket to make sure the USB drive was secure. I had the evidence of Gavin's theft, but I needed to know where Zoe stood. Was she a victim of his manipulation, or was she a partner in his crimes? I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that she was innocent. I walked in. The bell above the door chimed. Zoe was already there, sitting in our usual booth at the back. She was dressed in a white designer suit that cost more than the waitress made in a year. She was typing furiously on her phone, her brow furrowed in annoyance. She didn't look up when I slid into the seat opposite her. "You are late, Dad," she said, her eyes still glued to the screen. "I have a spa appointment at 2. We have to make this quick." I looked at her. I looked for the little girl with pigtails who used to beg for a strawberry milkshake. I couldn't find her. Sitting across from me was a stranger with cold eyes and a heart hardened by luxury. I ordered us lunch, I said, ignoring her tone. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup, your favorite." Zoe finally put the phone down. She sighed a long, dramatic exhale of impatience. "Dad, I don't eat gluten anymore. You know that. And I certainly don't eat greasy diner food. I will just have an iced tea." The waitress arrived with the food. I nodded at her to leave it. The steam from the tomato soup rose between us, a barrier of nostalgia that only I seemed to feel. "Zoe," I started, keeping my voice low. "We need to talk. Not about the gala, not about the signing, about us, about this family." She rolled her eyes. "Here we go. Is this going to be another lecture about the good old days, about how you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps? Because I really don't have the energy for it today." "No lectures," I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the sticky table. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. More honest than you have ever been in your life." Zoe picked up her iced tea and took a sip, staring at me over the rim of the glass. Her expression was bored. "Have you noticed anything strange about Gavin lately?" I asked. She lowered the glass slowly. "Strange how?" "He is stressed," I said, carefully choosing my words. "He is moving money around, large sums, and he is cutting corners at the company." "Dangerous corners." Zoe stiffened. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't surprise, it was defensiveness. Gavin is the CEO, Dad, she said sharply. That is his job. He manages the finances. He makes the hard decisions that you are too sentimental to make. There is a difference between hard decisions and illegal ones, Zoe. I said, my voice hardening. I found discrepancies in the accounts. Money missing from the pension fund, the house money gone, and there are rumors about the trucks running illegal loads at night. I watched her face closely. I was begging her with my eyes to be shocked. I wanted her to gasp. I wanted her to say she didn't know. I wanted her to be the victim. But she didn't gasp. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she let out a short, bitter laugh. "You are unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "You are actually paranoid, aren't you? Gavin told me you were losing it, but I didn't want to believe him. Now I see he was right." "I am not losing anything, Zoe," I said, slapping my hand on the table. The cutlery rattled. "I have proof. Gavin is laundering money. He is poisoning the earth to line his pockets, and he is stealing from me. From you." Zoe slammed her glass down. The tea sloshed onto the table. "Stop it," she hissed. "Just stop it. You are jealous. That is what this is. You are jealous that Gavin is taking the company to levels you never could. You were happy driving trucks and making small profits. Gavin is a visionary. He is thinking global. He is a criminal," I said. "He is a genius," she countered, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to live the way we do? Do you know how much the tuition is for the kids' private school? How much the club membership costs? How much the maintenance on the villa in France is? You think that money grows on trees." I sat back stunned. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "So you know," I whispered. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It hurt more than the arthritis. It hurt more than the betrayal of a friend. This was my flesh and blood. You know he is stealing. You know he is dumping waste, and you don't care. Zoe looked at me with a look of pure disdain. "I care about results, Dad. I care that my children grow up with the best of everything. I care that we have security. If Gavin has to bend a few rules to make that happen, then so be it. That is how the real world works. You are just too old and too soft to understand it. Bend rules," I choked out. "People could die, Zoe. Hattie almost died." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. Nobody is going to die. And if you keep digging, if you keep trying to sabotage Gavin with your senile delusions, then you leave me no choice." She leaned in closer, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of cruelty. "If you don't sign those papers tonight, Dad, if you cause a scene, you will never see your grandchildren again. I will get a restraining order. I will tell the judge you are mentally unstable. I will tell them you threatened us. And with Gavin's lawyers, we will win. You will die alone in that big empty house, and my kids won't even know your name." I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had bounced on my knee. The woman I had taught to ride a bike. The woman I had built an empire for. And I realized with a terrifying clarity that she was gone. The Zoe I loved had died a long time ago, suffocated by greed and entitlement. The woman sitting in front of me was just an accomplice named Mrs. Mercer. My heart didn't break. It shattered into dust, and then it hardened into stone. I looked at the untouched grilled cheese sandwich. I looked at the tomato soup that had gone cold and formed a skin on top. "Okay," I said softly. Zoe sat back looking triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought her threat had cowed me into submission. "Good," she said, checking her watch. "I am glad we understand each other. Now go home, take your pill. Put on your tuxedo, and smile tonight. Do it for the kids." She stood up, threw a $100 bill on the table, and walked out without looking back. She didn't kiss me goodbye. She didn't say I love you. She just walked out to her luxury SUV and drove away, leaving me in the wreckage of our relationship. I sat there for 5 minutes. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the low chatter of the other diners. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was hot and salty. I wiped it away with a rough napkin. That was the last tear I would ever shed for Zoe. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but steady. I walked to the back of the diner, past the kitchen where the smell of frying grease reminded me of my first job. I went into the men's restroom. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The eyes staring back at me were tired, but they were clear. The hesitation was gone. The father was gone. Only the judge remained. I pulled out my burner phone. I dialed the number for Arthur Banks, my lawyer and oldest friend. Arthur picked up on the first ring. Elle, are you okay? I looked at my reflection. I straightened my tie. No, Arthur, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, cold and metallic. I am not okay. But I am ready. Did you talk to her? Arthur asked gently. I did. And I closed my eyes for a second, seeing Zoe's sneering face one last time. Then I opened them. She is one of them, Arthur. She made her choice. There was a silence on the line. Arthur knew how much I loved her. He knew this was killing me. I am sorry, Elle, he said softly. Don't be, I said. We have a job to do. Activate Plan B. Arthur, are you sure Elle Plan B is scorched earth? If we do this, she loses everything. She could go to jail. I gripped the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. She threatened the kids, Arthur. She threatened to erase me. She chose the money over the blood, so let her choke on it. I took a deep breath. Update the will, Arthur. Cut her out. Everything goes to the driver's scholarship fund. And call the FBI contact. Tell him I am ready to turn state's witness. Tell him to bring the handcuffs to the gala. 2 pairs. 2 pairs. Arthur repeated, his voice heavy. Yes, I said, 1 for Gavin, and 1 for his wife. I hung up the phone. I dropped it into the trash can. I didn't need to hide anymore. I washed my hands, scrubbing them hard as if I could wash away the stain of my own family. I walked out of the restroom. I walked out of the diner. The sun was shining outside, but I didn't feel the warmth. I got into my truck and started the engine. I had 6 hours until the gala, 6 hours to mourn my daughter, and then I would destroy her. I put the truck in gear and drove away, not looking back at the diner, not looking back at the past. The road ahead was lonely, but it was the only road left. I sat in the cab of my truck, parked in the shadow of an abandoned textile factory. The engine was off, but the heat from the block still radiated through the floorboards, warming my legs. Outside, the wind was picking up swirling trash around the empty lot, but the real storm was happening inside my phone. I held the device to my ear, listening to the voice of Arthur Banks, my lawyer and the only man left in this city I could trust. He had just dropped a bomb that made the earlier betrayal by my daughter feel like a gentle tap. Elle, you need to listen to me very carefully, Arthur said, his voice low and grave. I pulled the property records. I pulled the liens. It is worse than we thought. Gavin didn't just steal the cash, he mortgaged the fleet. I felt the blood drain from my face. The fleet. My 500 trucks. They were the heart and soul of Barnes Logistics. They were the iron horses that put food on the tables of 1,000 families. He leveraged everything, Arthur continued. Every single tractor, every single trailer. He took out high-risk loans from private equity firms that operate more like loan sharks. And here is the kicker, Elle. The loans are callable immediately if there is a change in leadership or a drop in stock value. I gripped the steering wheel. So he trapped me, I whispered. Exactly, Arthur said. It is a pincer move. If you sign the power of attorney tonight, you are personally guaranteeing those loans. You will be signing away your personal assets, your savings, and even your life insurance to cover his gambling debts. You will be destitute within a week. And if I don't sign, I asked, dreading the answer. If you don't sign, and if you expose him publicly, the stock crashes, Arthur said. The lenders will call the loans on Monday morning. They will seize the trucks. The company goes bankrupt. The drivers lose their jobs. The pension fund vanishes. Gavin walks away because the debt is corporate, but the legacy of Barnes Logistics dies. I sat there in silence. It was a perfect trap. Gavin had rigged the game so that no matter what move I made, the house came down. He was counting on me being too proud to let the company fail. He thought I would sign the papers to save the brand even if it meant destroying myself. He thought I was a martyr, but he forgot that I wasn't just a businessman. I was a survivor. So I have to sign, I said, my voice flat. No, Arthur said. You have to make him think you are signing. We need to buy time, Elle. We need 24 hours to get the FBI to freeze the assets before the lenders move in. If the feds seize the company as a crime scene, the banks can't touch the trucks. It puts everything in stasis. It saves the fleet. But I have to sign the document on stage tonight, I argued. There will be cameras. There will be witnesses. If I don't sign, Gavin will declare me incompetent right there. Then sign something else, Arthur said. I looked out at the desolate factory yard. A plan began to form in my mind. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was the kind of plan that would get me killed if it failed. I need a duplicate, Arthur, I said. I need a document that looks exactly like the power of attorney. Same weight of paper, same font, same binding, but I need the text to be different. I need it to be a confession of guilt, surrendering all his assets to the company. Arthur hesitated. That is forgery, or at least it is fraud. It is justice, Arthur, I snapped. Can you do it? I have a guy, Arthur said finally. I will meet you at the print shop on 4th Street in an hour. But if he checks the document before you sign it, he won't, I said, cutting him off. He is arrogant. He thinks I am drugged. He thinks I am beaten. He won't look at the paper. He will only look at the victory. I hung up. My hands were steady now. The trap was set, but I wasn't the one who was going to step into it. I drove to the print shop. It was a small, dusty place that smelled of ink and ozone. Arthur was waiting for me. He handed me a blue folder. I opened it. Inside was a document that looked identical to the one Gavin had shoved in my face yesterday. The crest was perfect. The legal jargon looked dense and official. But on the signature page, the clauses were different. Instead of granting power, it stripped Gavin Mercer of all authority and admitted to embezzlement. It is a masterpiece, Arthur said, wiping sweat from his forehead. But how are you going to swap them? The lawyers will have the real copy. I am a magician, Arthur, I said, closing the folder. Watch me. I left the shop with the fake document tucked into the inside pocket of my jacket right against my heart. I felt like I was carrying a loaded gun. I had to get home. I had to get into my tuxedo. I had to prepare for the performance of my life. I turned my truck onto the industrial highway that led back to the suburbs. The road was empty, a long stretch of gray asphalt cutting through the marshes. I checked my rearview mirror. A black SUV was behind me. It had tinted windows and no front license plate. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I changed lanes and the SUV changed with me. I sped up. The SUV sped up. My instincts screamed. This wasn't a coincidence. I pressed the accelerator. The old Ford engine roared. I was doing 70 miles per hour. The SUV accelerated effortlessly, closing the gap. It pulled up alongside me. I looked over. The window rolled down. I saw a face I didn't recognize, a man with a scar running down his cheek. He wasn't looking at the road, he was looking at me. And then he swerved. He didn't just drift, he slammed his heavy vehicle into the side of my truck. Metal screamed against metal. My truck shuddered violently. The impact nearly tore the steering wheel from my grip. I fought to keep the truck on the road, my tires screeching as they flirted with the gravel shoulder. This wasn't a warning. They were trying to run me off the road. They were trying to kill me. Gavin wasn't taking any chances. He wanted to make sure I didn't make it to the gala, or maybe he wanted to stage an accident to explain why the grieving son-in-law had to take over. The SUV pulled back and prepared to ram me again. We were approaching a bridge over the river. If they hit me there, I would go over the guardrail. It was a 100-foot drop into freezing water. I looked at the SUV. They were driving a modern car with traction control and stability assist. I was driving a tank made of American steel. "You want to play rough," I shouted over the roar of the wind. "Let's play." I didn't wait for them to hit me. I hit the brakes hard. The SUV shot past me, surprised by the sudden deceleration. I downshifted the engine, screaming in protest. As the SUV tried to slow down to match my speed, I floored it. I turned the wheel sharp to the left. I clipped the rear quarter panel of the SUV. It was a classic PIT maneuver, something every trucker learns to avoid but knows how to execute in a nightmare scenario. The SUV lost traction. Its rear end swung out. The driver overcorrected. The vehicle spun wildly across the asphalt tires, smoking. It hit the concrete barrier of the bridge with a sickening crunch. The SUV flipped onto its side, sliding in a shower of sparks before coming to a halt. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If they were alive, they would have guns. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I looked in the mirror. The wreck was shrinking behind me. No one was getting out. I realized then that the rules of civilization no longer applied. Gavin had crossed the line from white-collar criminal to murderer. He had sent men to kill his wife's father. I reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror. My eyes stared back at me. They were hard. They were cold. "He wanted a funeral," I said to the empty cab. "I'm going to give him one, but it won't be mine." I drove the rest of the way to the mansion, taking back roads, keeping my eyes scanning every intersection. I pulled into the garage and closed the door. I inspected the side of my truck. The paint was scraped, the metal dented, but it held. Just like me. I walked into the house. It was quiet, the calm before the storm. I went upstairs to my room. My tuxedo was hanging on the door. It looked like a shroud. I took a shower, washing off the sweat of the chase. I dressed slowly. The crisp white shirt, the black tie, the cufflinks that Martha had given me on our 25th anniversary. I put the fake document in the left pocket of the jacket. I put the USB drive in the right pocket. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I didn't look like an old man anymore. I looked like an executioner dressed for a formal event. I walked downstairs. Gavin and Zoe were waiting in the foyer. They looked glamorous. Zoe in a red dress that looked like blood. Gavin in a tuxedo that cost more than my first house. "You are late," Gavin said, checking his watch. "And what happened to your truck?" "I saw a dent." "I had a little fender bender," I said, my voice calm, eerily calm. "Some idiot didn't know how to drive." But I handled it. Gavin's eyes narrowed. He looked for fear. He looked for the effects of the blue pill. He saw neither. But he was too arrogant to see the danger. He just saw an old man who had survived a minor accident. "Well, let's go," he said. "The car is waiting. It is showtime." "Yes," I said, stepping out into the cool evening air. "It is showtime." I got into the back of the limousine with the people who wanted me dead. I smiled at them. It was the smile of a man who knows the ending of the movie while everyone else is still guessing. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut. I steered my dented Ford truck into the gravel lot of the Iron Skillet. It was a roadside diner on the edge of the industrial district, a place that smelled of diesel fumes and fried onions. This was the heartbeat of Barnes Logistics. It was where my drivers ate, where they slept, and where they talked. My hands were still shaking slightly from the car chase, but I forced them to be steady. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My suit was rumpled, my tie was loose, and there was a smear of grease on my cheek. I didn't wipe it off. It was a badge of honor. I stepped out of the truck. The wind was cold, biting through my thin jacket. I walked toward the neon sign that buzzed and flickered in the twilight. Inside, I knew I would find the men and women who moved the world for me. But I also knew I was walking into a room full of people who thought I had betrayed them. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The bell chimed. It was a cheerful sound that clashed with the atmosphere in the room. The diner was packed. 50 drivers sat in booths and at the counter. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of clinking silverware. But the moment I stepped inside, the noise died. It didn't taper off. It stopped dead. 50 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. These were eyes I had known for decades, eyes that used to look at me with respect. Now they looked at me with cold, hard hatred. "Well, look who decided to come down from the ivory tower," a voice boomed from the back. It was Big Mike. He was 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and beard, a man who had driven for me since the very first day. He stood up slowly, unfolding his massive frame from a booth. He walked toward me, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't offer a handshake. He crossed his arms over his chest, blocking my path. "We heard you are retiring," El Mike said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We heard you are handing the keys over to the Golden Boy. Is that true?" I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. "I am not retiring, Mike," I said, my voice steady. "I am fighting." "Fighting," Mike laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "You are not fighting, El. You are signing. We saw the memos. We saw the new contracts Gavin sent out. Pay cuts, longer hours, and no overtime. He says it is part of the restructuring that you approved." "I didn't approve anything," I said, raising my voice so the whole room could hear. "Gavin is doing this behind my back." "Save it, El," a woman shouted from the counter. It was Sarah, a single mother who drove the night shift. "You are the owner. Nothing happens without your signature. You sold us out for a retirement package. You are just like the rest of them. You got your millions and you left us to rot." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Someone threw a crumpled napkin at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. It was a small gesture, but it hurt more than the car crash. These people were my family, and they looked at me like I was the enemy. I felt a surge of anger. Not at them, but at Gavin. He had not only stolen my money, he had stolen my reputation. He had turned my own people against me. I walked forward, pushing past Mike. He grabbed my shoulder. "Where do you think you are going, El?" he growled. "I am going to the table," I said, pulling away from his grip, "and you are going to listen to me, because in 5 minutes you are going to be begging me for a job. You are going to be begging me to save you." I walked to the center of the room and climbed up onto a sturdy oak table. My knees screamed in protest, but I stood tall. I looked down at them. I looked at their tired faces, their calloused hands. "You think I abandoned you," I shouted. "You think I am sitting in a mansion drinking scotch while you drive through the night. You are wrong." I reached into my jacket pocket. I didn't pull out a speech. I pulled out the black notebook I had taken from Hattie. I held it up like a preacher holding a Bible. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Silence. "This is the real ledger," I said. "This is the book that Gavin tried to burn. And do you know what is in it?" I opened the book to the page Hattie had marked. I pointed to the rows of numbers. "This is your pension fund," I said. $5 million. The money you saved for 20 years. The money for your kids' college. The money for your retirement." I paused, letting the words sink in. "It is gone," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "Gavin stole it. He drained the account 3 days ago. He put it all into high-risk cryptocurrency in the Cayman Islands." The room went deadly silent again. But this time it wasn't the silence of hate. It was the silence of shock. "Liar," Mike whispered. "He wouldn't dare. That is federal prison time." "He doesn't care about prison because he plans to be gone before you find out," I continued. "And it gets worse." I flipped the page. "He mortgaged the trucks," I said. "Every single rig parked outside. He took out loans against them. If I don't stop him tonight, the bank takes your trucks on Monday morning. You won't just be broke, you will be unemployed." I saw the color drain from Sarah's face. I saw Mike's fists clench until his knuckles turned white. The anger in the room shifted. It turned like a tide. It wasn't directed at me anymore. It was a raw, terrified fury looking for a target. "Why should we believe you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "You are still his father-in-law." "Because he tried to kill me today," I said. I pointed to the grease on my face. I pointed to the rip in my jacket. "He sent men to run me off the road. He tried to drug me. And he tried to kill Hattie." "Hattie?" Mike asked. "The cleaning lady." "Yes," I said. "Because she knew. She is the one who gave me this book. She is hiding in the woods right now, terrified for her life." I looked around the room. I saw the realization hitting them one by one. They weren't just employees. They were victims of a heist. "So I am not asking for your forgiveness," I said. "I am asking for your help." Tonight at 7 o'clock, there is a gala at the convention center. Gavin is going to stand on a stage and announce the new era of Barnes Logistics. He is going to smile for the cameras while he stands on your necks. I took a deep breath. I am going there to stop him. I am going there to fire him. But I can't do it alone. He has security. He has lawyers. He has the police in his pocket. "I need an army," I said. "I need Barnes Logistics." Mike looked up at me. His eyes were burning. "What do you want us to do, Elle? Do you want us to strike?" I shook my head. "No, I don't want to strike. A strike is passive. A strike is what victims do." I leaned forward. "I want a siege." I jumped down from the table. My knees buckled, but Mike caught me. He held me up. "I want every truck in this lot rolling in 1 hour," I said. "I want you to drive to the convention center. I want you to block every exit. I want you to surround the building. I want you to lean on your horns until the glass rattles in the windows. I want Gavin to look out and see a wall of steel." And then Mike asked, a grin slowly spreading across his face. And then I said, "I want you to walk in with me. I want you to bring your tire irons, not to use them, just to remind him who built this company." "What about the police?" Sarah asked. "They will arrest us." "Let them try," I said. "You can arrest one driver. You can't arrest 50 big rigs. And besides, I have the FBI waiting. But the FBI needs probable cause. They need a witness." I looked at Mike. "I need you to send a team to the safe house," I said. "Pick up Hattie. Bring her to the gala. Bring her in through the back door at exactly 7:30. She is the bullet. You are the gun." Mike turned to the room. "You heard the man," he shouted. "Drop your forks. Fire up the engines. We have a party to crash." The sound that followed was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of 50 chairs scraping against the floor at once. It was the sound of 50 drivers grabbing their keys. I stood by the door as they filed out. They didn't glare at me anymore. They nodded. Some patted me on the back. "We got you," L1 driver said. "Let's go get our money back," Sarah said, her eyes fierce. I walked out into the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in blood orange. One by one, the massive diesel engines roared to life. The ground shook. The smell of exhaust filled the air. It was the smell of power. I watched as the trucks lined up. They were old. They were dented. But they were strong, just like me. Mike pulled his rig up next to me. He rolled down the window. "Get in L," he said. "I will give you a ride to your limo. You need to look the part." I climbed up onto the step of the truck. I looked out at the convoy forming behind us. Gavin wanted a hostile takeover, I said to Mike. "Well, he is about to get the most hostile takeover in history." Mike laughed and pulled the air horn. The sound echoed across the city, a warning shot to anyone foolish enough to stand in our way. We drove out of the lot, the convoy stretching for a mile behind us. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't alone. I was the general of an army of 18-wheelers, and we were marching to war. I returned home just long enough to change into my tuxedo. The house was empty. Gavin and Zoe had already left. They thought I was coming in the hired car. They thought I was defeated. I got into the limousine that was waiting in the driveway. The driver was a stranger, one of Gavin's hires. He looked at me in the rearview mirror with indifference. "To the convention center, sir?" he asked. "Yes," I said, adjusting my cufflinks. "And drive slowly. I want to make an entrance." As the limo pulled away, I checked my pocket one last time. The fake document, the USB drive, and Hattie's black notebook, which I had transferred to my jacket. I closed my eyes and visualized the stage. I visualized Gavin's face. I visualized the moment the trap would snap shut. The phone in my pocket buzzed. It was a text from Mike. "Package secured. Convoy in position. ETA 10 mics." I smiled. The alliance was sealed in Diesel and Brotherhood. The gala was about to begin. But the real show wouldn't be on the stage. It would be in the streets. And when the horns started blowing, Gavin Mercer would learn a lesson he would never forget. You never mess with a man who has nothing left to lose. The limousine pulled up to the front steps of my estate just as the moon began to rise over the oak trees. The house looked magnificent from the outside with its white pillars and glowing windows, but I knew the rot was deep inside the foundation. I stepped out of the car, letting the chauffeur open the door. I didn't step out like the general who had just commanded an army of trucks. I stepped out like a broken old man. I let my shoulders slump forward. I dragged my left leg, slightly exaggerating the limp that usually only bothered me when it rained. I needed them to see a victim, not a threat. I walked into the foyer. The crystal chandelier was lit, casting a prism of light across the marble floor. Gavin and Zoe were waiting for me in the drawing room. They were already celebrating. A bottle of vintage Dom Perignon sat in a silver ice bucket. 2 crystal flutes were half empty on the coffee table. They looked up as I entered. They didn't offer me a glass. They didn't ask if I was hungry. They looked at me with the smug satisfaction of vultures circling a carcass that had finally stopped moving. "You made it back," Gavin said, swirling the champagne in his glass. "We were worried the accident might have shaken you up too much." I leaned heavily against the doorframe, letting my eyelids droop as if I could barely keep them open. "It was terrifying, Gavin," I said, my voice thick and slow, mimicking the effects of the blue pill. "That car came out of nowhere. I just want to sleep. I just want this day to be over." Zoe walked over to me. She didn't hug me. She peered into my eyes, checking my pupils. She was looking for the dilation that the antipsychotic drug would cause. I kept my gaze unfocused, staring past her at the wall. "Did you take your evening pill, Dad?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. I patted my pocket. I took it. I lied. "In the car. I feel fuzzy." "Good," she said, smiling at Gavin. "That means it is working. Go upstairs, Dad. Get some rest. We have a big day tomorrow. We need you fresh for the cameras." I nodded slowly and turned toward the stairs. As I climbed the steps, gripping the banister with a trembling hand, I heard the pop of another cork behind me. "To the new era," Gavin toasted loud enough for me to hear. "To us," Zoe replied, clinking her glass against his. They were drinking to my demise in my own house. I reached the top of the stairs and the mask fell from my face. My eyes snapped open, clear and cold. I walked silently to my bedroom, but I didn't go inside. I stood in the shadows of the hallway listening. I needed to know if they truly bought the act. Downstairs, the music started. Jazz, my favorite jazz record. They were dancing on my grave. I slipped into my room and locked the door. I didn't turn on the light. I moved quickly in the dark. I took off the tuxedo jacket and threw it on the chair. I took the fake document and the USB drive and hid them inside the hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick on my bookshelf. It was a cliché hiding spot, but Gavin didn't read books, he only read bank statements. Then I waited. I knew Gavin. He was arrogant, but he was also paranoid. He wouldn't just take my word for it. He would check. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, the music stopped. I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. They were coming fast. This wasn't a social call. I scrambled into the bed fully clothed except for my jacket and shoes. I pulled the duvet up to my chin. I slowed my breathing, forcing my body into a rhythm of deep sleep. The doorknob turned. The lock clicked. He had a master key. Of course he did. The door swung open, casting a wedge of hallway light across the room. Gavin stood there silhouetted against the light. He didn't enter immediately. He stood there breathing hard. Zoe says the cameras went dark, he muttered to himself. He walked into the room. He didn't check on me. He went straight to the window. He looked out at the driveway, checking for... I don't know what. Maybe he expected to see the police. Maybe he expected to see my truck. But the driveway was empty. He turned from the window and looked at the bedside table. He picked up the glass of water. It was full. He frowned. Then he began to search. He opened the drawer of the nightstand. He riffled through my papers. He opened the closet door and patted down the pockets of my suits. He was looking for a wire. He was looking for a phone. He was looking for any sign that the old lion still had claws. I lay there, eyes closed, muscles loose, praying that he wouldn't look in the bookshelf. If he found the USB drive now, it was over. He would kill me right here in this bed and call it a heart attack. He moved toward the bathroom. I heard the medicine cabinet open. He was counting the pills. I had prepared for this. I had flushed 3 blue pills down the toilet earlier to make the count match Zoe's schedule. He came back out. He stopped at the foot of the bed. He stared at me for a long time. I could feel his hatred radiating like heat. "You lucky old bastard," he whispered. "You built a kingdom, and you are too stupid to keep it." He walked to the trash can in the corner. He kicked it over. The contents spilled out. Tissues, wrappers, and right on top the empty blister pack of the blue pills. I had planted it there. A decoy. I heard him grunt in satisfaction. He picked up the empty foil pack. "Good boy," he said softly. "Keep taking your medicine." He tossed the trash back on the floor and walked out. The door clicked shut. The lock turned. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then I waited another 5 minutes just to be sure. I sat up in bed. My shirt was soaked in cold sweat. That was too close. He was suspicious about the cameras. He knew something was wrong, but his ego wouldn't let him believe that I was smart enough to outmaneuver him. He thought it was a glitch. He thought I was just a senile old man following orders. I got out of bed and walked to the small altar I had built in the corner of the room. It was a simple table with a vase of fresh lilies and a framed photograph of Martha. She was smiling in the photo, wearing her Sunday hat, looking at me with eyes that saw everything. I lit the candle in front of her picture. The flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the wall. "Martha," I whispered, my voice cracking for the first time that night. "I am sorry. I touched the glass of the frame. I promised you I would keep this family together. I promised you I would take care of Zoe. I failed you, Martha. I let a snake into our garden and he poisoned the fruit." I looked at her, smile. It seemed sadder tonight. "Zoe is gone, Martha. The girl we raised. She isn't there anymore. She chose the money. She chose him. And tomorrow I have to do something terrible. I have to destroy her to save what we built." I looked down at my left hand. The gold wedding band glinted in the candlelight. I had worn it for 45 years. It was a part of my finger. It was a symbol of love, of patience, of building a life brick by brick. But where I was going tomorrow, love couldn't follow. Tomorrow was war. And in war, you don't wear gold. You wear iron. I gripped the ring. My knuckles turned white. It was tight. It resisted as if it knew what I was about to do. I twisted it slowly, pulling it over the knuckle. It slid off, leaving a pale indentation on my skin. A ghost of a marriage. I opened the small velvet box on the table and placed the ring inside. It clinked softly against the lining. "Keep this for me, Martha," I said, closing the box. "I will come back for it when the fighting is done, when the house is clean again." I blew out the candle. The room plunged into darkness. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt light. I felt dangerous. The father was gone. The husband was gone. I walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit grounds. Somewhere out there, 50 trucks were moving through the night. Somewhere Hattie was safe. Somewhere the FBI was loading their weapons. Gavin Mercer wanted a show. He wanted a tragedy. Well, I was going to give him a masterpiece. I lay back down on the bed, but I didn't close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing every word, every move, every look for tomorrow. Sleep was for the innocent. And tonight, I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Let the morning come. Let the storm break. I was ready to thunder. The convention center was transformed into a palace of glass and gold. It was a grotesque display of wealth that made my stomach turn. I stepped out of the limousine, and the first thing that hit me was the noise. It wasn't the roar of diesel engines that I loved. It was the high-pitched chatter of socialites and the click of camera shutters. I adjusted my tuxedo jacket. I felt the weight of the fake document in my left pocket and the USB drive in my right. They were my shield and my sword. I walked up the red carpet. My left knee throbbed with every step, a painful reminder of 40 years on the road. But I didn't let the pain show on my face. I adopted the mask I had practiced in the mirror. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I let my eyes drift out of focus. To the world, I was Eldridge Barnes, the senile founder who was being put out to pasture. Inside the ballroom, the air smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. A champagne tower stood in the center of the room, reaching 10 feet high. It was a precarious monument of crystal fragility, just like Gavin's empire. Waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd like ghosts, offering hors d'oeuvres that cost more than a driver's weekly wage. I looked around the room. I saw bankers. I saw politicians. I saw the people who had never lifted a box in their lives but were eager to profit from the sweat of my workers. They looked at me with a mix of pity and dismissal. I was the ghost at the feast. "There he is," a voice called out. It was Gavin. He was holding court near the stage, surrounded by a group of investors. He looked magnificent in his bespoke tuxedo. He saw me and his smile widened. It was the smile of a hunter who sees the deer finally walk into the clearing. "Everyone, please make way for the man of the hour," Gavin announced, his voice projecting effortlessly. The crowd parted. I shuffled forward, playing my role. I let my feet drag slightly on the polished floor. "Hello, Gavin," I mumbled, keeping my voice low and unsure. "It is very loud in here." Gavin placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, possessive. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a gesture of control. "It is a celebration, Eldridge," he said, loud enough for the investors to hear. "We are celebrating your legacy and the bright future ahead." He turned to a tall man with silver hair. "This is Mr. Sterling from the venture capital firm. He is very excited about the transition." Mr. Sterling shook my limp hand. "A pleasure, Mr. Barnes. You built a fine company. Gavin here tells me he has big plans to modernize it." I looked at Sterling. I saw the greed in his eyes. He didn't care about the trucks. He didn't care about the drivers. He only cared about the return on investment. "Modernize," I repeated dully. "Yes. Gavin is very smart." Zoe appeared at my side. She was wearing diamonds that glittered under the chandeliers. Diamonds bought with stolen pension money. She took my arm. "Come sit down, Dad," she said. "We have a special table for you right in the front. You need to save your energy for the ceremony." She led me to a table right next to the stage. I sat down heavily. From here, I had a perfect view of the podium. I had a perfect view of the lie that was about to be told. Zoe sat next to me. She didn't speak. She just kept texting on her phone, likely coordinating with the security team to make sure the old man didn't cause a scene. She didn't know that the real security team was currently parking 18-wheelers at the loading dock. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. A spotlight hit the stage. Gavin walked out to thunderous applause. He looked every inch the CEO. He was young, he was handsome, he was charismatic, he was a snake in a silk suit. "Thank you, everyone," Gavin said, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you for coming tonight. We are here to honor history, but we are also here to make history." He gestured toward me. 40 years ago, a man bought a single truck. He drove through storms. He drove through the night. That man is Eldridge Barnes, my father-in-law, my mentor. The crowd clapped politely. I sat stone still, staring at my hands. But the world changes. Gavin continued, his tone shifting to one of serious urgency. The logistics industry is evolving, and Barnes Logistics must evolve with it. We can no longer rely on the old ways. We can no longer be just a trucking company. We must be a technology company, a sustainable company. He pressed a button on a remote. A massive screen behind him lit up. The words Project Phoenix appeared in giant fiery letters. I watched the screen. It showed sleek electric trucks. It showed automated warehouses. It showed a future that looked clean and profitable. Tonight I am proud to announce Project Phoenix, Gavin said. A $50 million initiative to revolutionize our fleet. We are going green. We are going digital. And we are partnering with global charities to ensure that our carbon footprint is zero. I felt a surge of bile in my throat. Zero carbon footprint. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. He was dumping toxic medical waste into a quarry, poisoning the groundwater, and here he was preaching about sustainability. He was using the cover of green energy to explain why he was selling off the old fleet and why the money was moving to offshore accounts. It was a classic shell game. And the audience was eating it up. Brilliant Sterling whispered from the next table. Gavin continued his speech, painting a picture of a utopia that was built on a foundation of fraud. He spoke for 20 minutes. Every word was a lie, every promise was a trap. And every time he mentioned my name, he made me sound like a relic. A beloved antique that needed to be put in a display case so the real men could do the work. But to make this vision a reality, Gavin said, his voice reaching a crescendo, we need unity, we need a single hand on the wheel, and tonight that transition becomes official. He looked down at me. The spotlight swung from him to me. I was blinded by the glare. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the founder of Barnes Logistics, Eldridge Barnes. The applause was deafening. Zoe stood up and pulled me to my feet. It is time, Dad, she hissed in my ear. Don't trip, and don't embarrass us. I walked toward the stairs. My legs felt heavy, not from the act, but from the sheer weight of the moment. This was it, the point of no return. I climbed the stairs one by one. I could feel the eyes of 500 people on my back. I could feel the heat of the stage lights on my face. Gavin met me at the podium. He hugged me. It was a performance for the cameras. He squeezed me hard. Smile, old man, he whispered. You are on TV. I pulled away and looked out at the audience. Beyond the glare of the lights, I could see the dark shapes of the cameras. I knew this was being live-streamed. I knew the drivers were watching on their phones in the parking lot. I knew Hattie was watching from the wings. A lawyer walked onto the stage. It wasn't Arthur Banks. It was a man I didn't recognize, a shark from Gavin's firm. He was carrying a leather folder. He placed it on the podium and opened it. The power of attorney. The document lay there innocent and deadly. The black ink seemed to pulse under the lights. Gavin handed me a gold pen. It was heavy. Just sign on the line, Eldridge, Gavin said into the microphone, his voice full of fake reverence. And the future begins. I took the pen. My hand trembled. This time I didn't have to fake the tremor. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins like fire. I looked at the document. I saw the words, total transfer of assets. I saw the words, irrevocable authority. I looked at Zoe standing in the front row. She was smiling encouragingly. She mouthed the words, go to sleep. She wanted me to sign away my life and then go home and die quietly. She wanted her inheritance without the inconvenience of her father. I looked at Gavin. He was beaming. He thought he had won. He thought the drug had made me compliant. He thought I was a puppet and he was pulling the strings. I reached into my inner pocket. What are you doing? Gavin whispered, his smile faltering for a split second. I need my reading glasses, I said into the microphone. My voice was raspy, but it was amplified across the silent ballroom. I can't sign what I can't read. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. The endearing old man and his glasses. I kept my hand in my pocket. I felt the cool paper of the fake document. I felt the hard plastic of the USB drive. I pulled out my glasses case, but I also palmed the USB drive. I put my glasses on. I looked at the document again. You know, Gavin, I said, leaning into the microphone. My voice changed. I dropped the slur. I dropped the hesitation. I spoke with the deep booming resonance that I used to use on the CB radio. Change is indeed necessary. Gavin stiffened. He heard the change in my tone. He stepped closer. Just sign it, Dad, he said through gritted teeth. I looked him in the eye. But before we build the future, I continued ignoring him. We must clear away the rot of the past. I didn't look down at the paper. I looked up at the giant screen behind us, the screen that was still displaying the words, Project Phoenix. I have a presentation too, I said. I slammed the USB drive into the port on the side of the digital podium. Gavin lunged for me. No, he shouted. But it was too late. The screen flickered. The fiery letters of Project Phoenix vanished. And in their place, a grainy video began to play. The room gasped. The gala was over. The trial had begun. I stood at the podium with the golden pen in my hand. It felt heavy and cold like the trigger of a loaded gun. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 500 people were holding their breath, waiting for the old lion to sign away his kingdom. I could see the reflection of the chandeliers in the polished black surface of the stage. I could see Gavin standing next to me, his chest puffed out in premature victory. I could see Zoe in the front row, her eyes wide with anticipation. They were all waiting for the ink to hit the paper. They were waiting for the end. But I was just waiting for the green light on the USB drive to stop blinking. I lowered the pen toward the paper. Gavin leaned in closer, his cologne smelling of triumph. "Just sign it, Dad," he whispered, "and you can go home." I looked at him. I looked deep into his eyes, and I let the mask of the senile old man slip away. I let him see the fire that was burning behind the fog. I saw confusion flicker across his face. He realized in that split second that something was wrong. But it was too late. The little light on the USB drive turned solid green. The virus was uploaded. The system was mine. I didn't sign. Instead, I tapped the microphone 3 times. The sound echoed through the hall like gunshots. "Let there be light," I whispered. And then the world went dark. The main floodlights above the stage cut out instantly. The crystal chandeliers flickered and died. A collective gasp rose from the audience. For a moment, there was total darkness save for the emergency exit signs glowing red in the distance. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to grow louder in the sudden visual void. "What is happening?" Gavin hissed in the dark. His hand grabbed my arm, but his grip was weak. He was panicked. He was a creature of the light of the image, and without it, he was nothing. "Stay calm, everyone," a voice shouted from the back. Just a technical difficulty, but it wasn't a difficulty. It was a takeover. Suddenly, the massive LED screen behind us roared to life. It was 50 feet wide and 20 feet tall. It didn't show the sleek logo of Project Phoenix anymore. It showed static white noise that crackled like thunder. The light from the screen washed over the crowd, bathing them in a harsh, ghostly gray glow. I saw their faces turned upward, mouths open in confusion. Then the static cleared. The video began to play. The footage was grainy at first shot from a low angle on a rainy night, but the image sharpened. It showed 2 men standing on the edge of a quarry. The rain was pouring down, but the face of the man in the foreground was unmistakable. It was Gavin. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo. He was wearing a raincoat, and he was laughing. Behind him, a truck was backing up. Not just any truck. It was Unit 404, one of my trucks. The back doors were open, and men were rolling barrels out. Bright yellow barrels stamped with the universal symbol for biohazard. The audio kicked in. It was loud, amplified by the massive concert speakers of the convention center. "Dump it all," Gavin's voice boomed through the ballroom. "Just push it over the edge. The water is deep enough. Nobody checks the groundwater out here anyway." The crowd in the ballroom screamed. It wasn't a cheer. It was a sound of pure horror. A woman in the front row dropped her champagne glass, and the sound of shattering crystal punctuated the video. On the screen, Gavin turned to the camera, or rather to the person holding the hidden camera. "Why are you filming?" "Hattie, put that away," he snarled. "We are making history here. We are turning poison into profit." The video cut. Static again. Gavin stood frozen on the stage next to me. He was staring at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. His perfectly constructed reality was disintegrating pixel by pixel. "Cut the feed," he screamed. His voice was high and hysterical. Someone cut the power. But the video didn't stop. It cut to a new scene. This one was cleaner, sharper. It was shot inside a restaurant. Sonny's Diner. The timestamp in the corner showed it was from yesterday. It showed Zoe sitting across from me. She looked beautiful and cruel. I watched as the real Zoe, sitting in the front row, covered her mouth with her hands. She started to shake. She knew what was coming. On the screen, my voice asked, "Do you know he is stealing? Do you know people could die?" And then, giant as a goddess of vengeance, Zoe's face filled the screen. "I care about results, Dad," she said. Her voice was crisp and clear, echoing off the walls. "I care that we have security. If Gavin has to bend a few rules, so be it. Nobody is going to die. And if you keep digging, I will tell the judge you are insane. I will take the kids away. The gasp from the audience this time was different. It was the sound of disgust. The society ladies who had admired Zoe's diamonds just minutes ago recoiled from her as if she were contagious. Gavin snapped. The shock wore off and the survival instinct kicked in. He lunged at me. He didn't care about the cameras anymore. He didn't care about the audience. He just wanted to stop the truth. "Give me that drive," he roared, reaching for the laptop on the podium. He grabbed my lapel, tearing the expensive fabric. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You senile old fool, you ruined everything." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I planted my feet the way I used to plant them when I was securing a heavy load. I brought my hand up and shoved him hard in the chest. "Get your hands off me," I shouted. The microphone caught every sound of the struggle. The scuffle was broadcast to the entire room. Gavin stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. He fell onto the stage, landing hard on his backside. The great CEO, the visionary, looked like a petulant child thrown out of a sandbox. I adjusted my tie. I looked out at the crowd. The room was deadly silent again. The video had ended, leaving the Project Phoenix logo burning on the screen, a mocking reminder of the lie. I leaned into the microphone. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said. I looked down at Gavin, who was trying to scramble to his feet. "I apologize for the interruption," I continued. "It seems there was a slight error in the previous presentation. That was not the future of Barnes Logistics. That was the crime scene of Barnes Logistics." Gavin stood up, his face red with rage. "Security," he screamed, pointing at me. "Get him off the stage. He is having a psychotic break. He is dangerous." 2 security guards started to move toward the stage, but they hesitated. They looked at the screen. They looked at me. They looked at Gavin. They didn't know who to obey. The man who signed their checks, or the man who had just revealed a monster? I raised my hand, stopping them in their tracks. "I am not having a break, Gavin," I said. "I am having a breakthrough." I picked up the power of attorney document, the real one he had tried to make me sign. I held it up for everyone to see. "You wanted me to sign this," I said. "You wanted total control. You wanted me to retire so you could bury your toxic waste and your debts in my name." I ripped the document in half. The sound of tearing paper was sharp and satisfying. I ripped it again and again until it was just confetti. I threw the pieces into the air. They drifted down around Gavin like snow. I, Eldridge Barnes. I declared, my voice booming with the authority of a patriarch, founder of this company, owner of the majority share, and the only man in this room with clean hands. I pointed a finger at Gavin. It was a finger that had changed tires, shifted gears, and built an empire. It was a finger of judgment. "I hereby terminate your employment as CEO, effective immediately for cause of gross negligence, fraud, and criminal conspiracy." "You can't fire me," Gavin shrieked. "I control the board. I have the banks. You have nothing," I said, cutting him off. The banks just saw that video. The board just saw that video. And right now, the world is seeing that video. I looked at Zoe in the front row. She was sobbing quietly, her face buried in her hands. "And you, Zoe?" I said softly. But the microphone carried my pain to the rafters. "You are fired from my life. You are no longer my daughter. You are just a co-conspirator." Gavin looked around wildly. He saw the doors. He saw the exit signs. He realized the game was up. He turned to run. He sprinted toward the side of the stage, heading for the emergency exit. "He is running!" Someone shouted from the crowd. But he didn't get far, because as he reached the side of the stage, the heavy metal doors burst open. It wasn't the police. Not yet. It was Big Mike. And behind him were 50 truck drivers wearing their grease-stained uniforms, holding tire irons and wrenches. They filed into the room, lining the walls, creating a barrier of blue-collar steel. Gavin skidded to a halt. He looked at Mike. Mike looked at him and tapped a heavy wrench against his palm. "Going somewhere, boss?" Mike asked. Gavin backed away, terrified. He retreated to the center of the stage. He was trapped between the man he tried to kill and the people he tried to rob. I looked at the crowd. The shock was turning into anger. People were standing up. They were demanding answers. I looked at Gavin one last time. "You wanted a legacy, Gavin," I said. "Well, you got one. You will be remembered as the man who tried to bury the truth and got buried by it instead." And then, as if on cue, the wail of sirens pierced the air outside. The cavalry had arrived. But the war was already won. The silence in the ballroom following the video was shattered by a sound that I had never heard before. It was the sound of Gavin Mercer losing his mind. The carefully cultivated persona of the cool, collected CEO evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a desperate, terrified child. He didn't just shout, he shrieked. His voice cracked under the weight of his own panic, echoing off the high ceilings of the convention center. "He is insane," Gavin screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He is having a psychotic episode. That video is a deep fake. It is AI generated. Turn it off. Somebody turn off that damn screen." He looked wildly around the room, searching for an ally, but he found only shock and disgust. The investors who had been shaking his hand 5 minutes ago were now backing away, creating a wide circle around the stage as if Gavin were radioactive. Desperation clawed at his throat. He turned to the security team he had hired. These weren't my company guards. These were private contractors, men with thick necks and dead eyes who were paid to follow orders, not to ask questions. "Get him off the stage." Gavin commanded, his spittle flying into the microphone. "He is a threat to himself and others. Restrain him. Now." The head of security, a man twice my size, stepped forward. He reached for his baton. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about the paycheck. He signaled to his two subordinates. They flanked me, moving with the predatory grace of wolves closing in on a wounded deer. I stood my ground. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't step back. I looked at the head guard. "If you touch me," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "you will regret it for the rest of your life. You are not protecting a CEO. You are protecting a criminal." The guard hesitated for a fraction of a second, but Gavin's screaming spurred him on. "Do it," Gavin yelled. "I pay your salary. Take him down." The guard lunged. I braced myself for the impact, preparing to fight with everything I had left in my 71-year-old body. I tightened my grip on the podium, ready to use it as a weapon, but the blow never came. Before the guard could lay a hand on me, a thunderous crash shook the entire room. It sounded like a bomb going off, but it wasn't a bomb. It was the double doors at the back of the ballroom being kicked open with enough force to splinter the wood. Every head in the room turned. The music of the gala was replaced by the heavy rhythmic thud of work boots on marble. "Stop right there," a voice bellowed. It was Big Mike. He stood in the doorway, filling the frame like a titan. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his work jacket, stained with grease and smelling of diesel. He held a tire iron in his right hand, tapping it rhythmically against his leg. And he wasn't alone. Behind him came the flood. 50 men and women poured into the ballroom. They were my drivers. They were the people who drove through blizzards and heat waves. They were the people who missed their children's birthdays to deliver freight. They marched in not as a mob, but as a regiment. They moved with a synchronized purpose that was terrifying to behold. They fanned out, lining the walls, blocking the exits surrounding the security guards. The contrast was jarring, the grit of the road against the glitter of the gala, the reality of labor against the fantasy of wealth. The security guards froze. They looked at the drivers. They saw the wrenches. They saw the crowbars. But mostly, they saw the eyes of 50 people who had been robbed and were here to collect. "Step away from Mr. Barnes," Mike said, walking down the center aisle. The crowd of wealthy guests parted for him like the Red Sea. The head of security looked at Mike, then looked at his baton. He did the math. He realized he was outnumbered and outclassed. He slowly raised his hands and backed away from me. Gavin watched this unfold with horror. His army had been neutralized by mine. He looked for an escape route, but the wall of drivers was impenetrable. And then from the center of the phalanx of drivers, a small figure emerged. She walked slowly, but with a dignity that silenced the room. It was Hattie. She was wearing her Sunday best, a simple floral dress, and a coat that had seen better days. Her face was bruised from where she had fallen in the woods, but her eyes were clear. She walked up the stairs to the stage. She didn't look at the audience. She looked straight at Gavin. "You," Gavin whispered, "you are supposed to be dead." Hattie didn't speak. She reached into her purse and pulled out a black notebook. It was tattered and worn, but she held it up like it was the tablets of stone. She walked to the microphone. She stood next to me. She was trembling, but she didn't lower the book. "This is the logbook," Hattie said, her voice soft but amplified to every corner of the room. "I wrote down every truck, every barrel, every lie." She opened the book and turned it toward the cameras. "Gavin tried to kill me for this book," she said. "He crushed my car. He threatened my grandson. But he forgot one thing." She looked Gavin in the eye. "He forgot that the truth doesn't burn, and the truth doesn't die." Gavin collapsed. His legs simply gave out. He fell to his knees on the stage, not in prayer, but in defeat. The sight of Hattie, the woman he considered invisible, standing over him with the evidence of his crimes was the final blow to his ego. The room erupted into chaos. Journalists were shouting questions. Photographers were flashing their cameras. Zoe was screaming at Gavin, hitting him on the shoulder, hysterically demanding him to fix it. But it was too late to fix anything. From the side entrance, a new group of people entered. These men wore suits, but they weren't guests. They wore windbreakers with 3 yellow letters emblazoned on the back. FBI. Leading them was Arthur Banks, my lawyer and oldest friend. He looked at me and nodded. It was a nod of grim satisfaction. Arthur walked onto the stage, flanked by 4 federal agents. He didn't look at Gavin. He looked at the security guards. Federal agents, he announced, holding up his badge. Nobody leaves this room. This is now an active crime scene. 2 agents moved toward Gavin. They pulled him up from the floor roughly. He was limp, unresisting. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who sees his life ending. Gavin Mercer, an agent, said, his voice devoid of emotion, "You are under arrest." He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratcheting metal was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Click, click. The agent turned Gavin around and began to read from a card. "You are charged with 18 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of money laundering, violation of the Environmental Protection Act for illegal dumping of hazardous materials." The crowd gasped at the list of crimes. But the agent wasn't finished. "And 1 count of attempted murder in the 1st degree against Hattie Lewis, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder against Eldridge Barnes." The room went deadly quiet. Conspiracy to commit murder. Arthur Banks stepped forward to the microphone. He held up a plastic bag. Inside was the blue pill I had saved. "We have the toxicology report," Arthur said. "This pill was given to Mr. Barnes by his family. It is a high-dose antipsychotic. They were poisoning him. They were trying to induce a mental breakdown to force a power transfer." The crowd turned their eyes to Zoe. She was standing frozen in the front row. She looked at the handcuffs on her husband's wrists. She looked at the agent walking toward her. "No," she whispered, backing away. "I didn't know. He made me do it." "Zoe Mercer," the agent said, stepping in front of her. "Please place your hands behind your back." I watched from the stage as my daughter, my only child, was handcuffed. She looked up at me. Her mascara was running down her cheeks. Her eyes were pleading. "Daddy, help me," she cried. "Please." I looked at her. I felt a pain in my chest that was sharper than any heart attack. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to protect her. That was my instinct as a father, but I couldn't. Not this time. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "The man who could help you is gone," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "You killed him. You and your husband killed the father who loved you. All that is left is the witness." The agents led them away. Gavin walked with his head down, defeated. Zoe screamed and kicked, fighting the inevitable until the doors closed behind her. I stood alone on the stage. The lights were bright. The cameras were rolling, but I felt a profound emptiness. I looked at Hattie. She put her hand on my arm. "It is over, Mr. Barnes," she whispered. I looked at Big Mike and the drivers standing guard. They raised their wrenches in a silent salute. "Yes," I said, taking a deep breath. "It is over." I took the golden pen from the podium, the pen I was supposed to use to sign my life away. I snapped it in half and left the pieces on the floor. I walked down the stairs into the arms of my true family. The gala was ruined. The company stock would crash in the morning, but my soul was clean. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut on Gavin's wrists echoed through the silent ballroom like a thunderclap marking the end of the storm. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The investors, the politicians, and the socialites stood frozen, their champagne glasses forgotten in their hands, staring at the man they had toasted just an hour ago. Gavin Mercer, the golden boy, the visionary, the CEO, was now just a prisoner. But Gavin was not a man who accepted defeat with dignity. As the federal agent reached for his arm, Gavin snapped. The reality of spending the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary crashed down on him, and he reacted with the desperate feral instinct of a trapped animal. He let out a guttural scream and threw his body weight against the agent, knocking him off balance. With a burst of adrenaline fueled by pure panic, Gavin broke free. He didn't run toward his wife. He He didn't run toward his lawyers. He ran toward the emergency exit at the side of the stage. His eyes were wide and wild, fixed on the red, glowing sign that promised freedom. He scrambled across the stage, his expensive Italian shoes slipping on the polished surface, losing all semblance of grace. He leaped off the stage, landing awkwardly on the floor, and sprinted for the door. But he had forgotten who was guarding the perimeter. He had forgotten the army I had assembled. As Gavin reached the door, it didn't open. Instead, a figure stepped out from the shadows to block his path. It was Big Mike. He stood like a mountain of granite, his arms crossed over his grease-stained chest. Gavin skidded to a halt, his chest heaving. He looked left. He looked right. There was no escape. The wall of drivers had closed in. 50 men and women holding tire irons and wrenches formed a semicircle around him. They didn't attack him. They didn't need to. They just stood there, staring at him with the cold, hard judgment of the working class. "Move," Gavin shrieked, his voice cracking. "Get out of my way. Do you know who I am?" Big Mike looked down at him. He didn't blink. "I know exactly who you are," Mike said, his voice deep and calm. "You are the thief who stole my pension." Gavin tried to push past him, but Mike didn't budge. He simply extended one massive hand and shoved Gavin backward. It wasn't a violent shove, but it had the weight of justice behind it. Gavin stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. He fell hard onto the marble floor. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He tried to scramble backward, crab-walking away from the drivers, but he bumped into the legs of the FBI agents who had caught up with him. 2 agents grabbed him by the arms and hauled him to his feet. They didn't handle him gently this time. They slammed him against the wall, his face pressed against the cold plaster. "Gavin Mercer, stop resisting, or we will use force," the agent commanded. Gavin slumped against the wall. His tuxedo was torn, his hair was disheveled. He looked small, he looked pathetic. The arrogance that had defined him for years had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man who realized too late that money could not buy an exit from this. I watched from the podium, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I felt no joy in seeing him like this. I only felt the heavy relief of a burden being lifted. But the tragedy wasn't over yet. There was one more act to play out, and it would be the most painful one of all. Zoe was standing in the front row. She had watched her husband's arrest with a look of horror, but as the agent secured Gavin, her expression changed. I saw the gears turning in her mind. I saw the survival instinct kick in. She realized the ship was sinking, and she had no intention of going down with the captain. She turned her back on Gavin. She didn't look at him once. Instead, she turned toward the stage. She turned toward me. She ran to the edge of the stage. Her movement was erratic, desperate. She grabbed the hem of my pants, her knuckles white. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, perfectly ruining her makeup. "Daddy," she sobbed, her voice trembling with what sounded like heartbreak. "Daddy, please tell them. Tell them I didn't know." I looked down at her. I looked at the child I had raised. I remembered teaching her to tie her shoes. I remembered her first day of school, but those memories felt like they belonged to a different life. He lied to me. "Daddy," she cried, clutching my leg tighter. "Gavin lied to me. He told me it was all legal. He told me he was investing the money. I had no idea he was hurting people. I am a victim too. You have to help me. You can't let them take me." Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't gone to the diner yesterday, if I hadn't looked into her eyes and seen the truth, I might have believed her. The crowd was watching, whispering. Some looked sympathetic, a daughter betrayed by her husband. It was a compelling narrative. But I had the USB drive. I had the truth. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had synced the audio from the diner to the sound system. "Zoe," I said, my voice amplified through the speakers, "stand up." She froze. She looked at my face and she saw something that terrified her. She saw that I wasn't looking at her as a father. I was looking at her as a judge. "I gave you a chance, Zoe," I said softly. "Yesterday, at the diner. I asked you. I begged you to tell me the truth." I didn't know, she screamed, her desperation turning to anger. "I told you I didn't know." I pressed the button on my phone. The audio recording from the diner blasted through the ballroom. It was crystal clear. If Gavin has to bend a few rules to make that happen, then so be it. That is how the real world works. You are just too old and too soft to understand it. The voice was unmistakably hers. It was cold, calculating, and filled with disdain. The recording continued. "If you keep trying to sabotage Gavin with your senile delusions, then you leave me no choice. I will tell the judge you are mentally unstable. I will tell them you threatened us. Silence fell over the room. The sympathy evaporated instantly. The crowd looked at Zoe with the same revulsion they had directed at Gavin. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect of my destruction. Zoe let go of my leg as if she had been burned. She stepped back, her face pale as a sheet. The lie had been stripped away, leaving her naked in her greed. I stepped down from the podium. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at her. You knew about the poison, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. Hattie told me. You looked at the maps. You knew we were killing the earth to buy your diamonds. And you didn't care. Daddy, she whispered, but the words sounded hollow now. Don't call me that, I said. My daughter died the moment she chose money over her own father's life. You are not Zoe Barnes. You are Mrs. Mercer, and you have chosen your side. I signaled to Arthur Banks. He nodded to the remaining agents. They moved in on Zoe. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. An agent grabbed her wrist. She screamed a high-pitched sound of pure entitlement. Get your hands off me, she shrieked. Do you know who I am? You are a suspect in a federal investigation, ma'am, the agent said, spinning her around. I watched as they handcuffed her. The metal clicked shut, locking away the hands that used to hold mine when we crossed the street. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was hot and bitter. I didn't wipe it away. I let it fall. It was the last tear I would shed for the family that never was. Bring them out, the lead agent commanded. The procession began. It was a parade of shame. Gavin was dragged out first, his head hanging low, avoiding the flashes of the cameras that popped like strobes. He was followed by Zoe, who was still screaming, still blaming everyone but herself. They were marched down the center aisle, past the people they had tried to impress, past the drivers they had tried to rob. The press had breached the doors. A wall of photographers blocked the exit. As the agents pushed through, the flashes were blinding. Questions were shouted. Did you poison the water? Did you try to kill your father? Where is the money? I watched them disappear into the sea of lights. I watched until the doors swung shut, cutting off the noise and the chaos. Suddenly the room was quiet. The guests stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do. The party was over. The illusion was shattered. I stood alone on the huge, empty stage. The Project Phoenix logo on the screen behind me had gone dark. I looked out at the empty space where my family had stood. I felt small. I felt old. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the last 24 hours was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, not from age, but from the sheer magnitude of what I had just done. I had cut off my own limb to save the body. It was necessary, but God, it hurt. Hattie walked up to the stage. She didn't say anything. She just reached up and took my hand. Her grip was warm and rough. It was the grip of someone who understood survival. Big Mike climbed onto the stage. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. We are here, Elle, he said quietly. We aren't going anywhere. I looked at them. I looked at the drivers standing guard. I looked at Arthur Banks, who gave me a solemn nod from the floor. I wasn't alone. I had lost a daughter, but I had found a family. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the ballroom. It smelled of spilled champagne and ruined dreams. But underneath that, I could smell something else. Faint but distinct. The smell of diesel from Mike's jacket. The smell of the road. It smelled like freedom. I straightened my back. I adjusted my tie. Let's go home, Mike, I said. I have a lot of work to do. We walked off the stage together, leaving the ruins of the gala behind us. The fall was complete. The dust would settle, and tomorrow we would start to build again from the ground up. The morning after the gala, the sun rose over a city that was buzzing with my name, but the headlines were not kind. The stock market reacted exactly as I knew it would. Barnes Logistics plummeted. The revelation of the toxic dumping and the arrest of the CEO sent investors running for the hills. By noon, the company had lost 40% of its value. The phones in my office were ringing off the hook with angry creditors and terrified partners. But I didn't panic. I didn't hide. I sat at my desk, the same desk where I had started 40 years ago, and I got to work. Gavin had left a mess that was deeper than just bad PR. The debts he had racked up using the trucks as collateral were due immediately. The banks wanted their money, or they wanted my fleet. I looked at the spreadsheet. The number was staggering. It was more money than the company had in liquid assets. To save the jobs of Big Mike and Sarah and the 500 other drivers, I had to make a choice. I could declare bankruptcy and walk away with my personal fortune intact, or I could bleed for the company one last time. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone and called the real estate agent. I told him to list the mansion. Sell it today, I told him. I don't care about the price, just get it sold. That house with its marble floors and empty rooms had been a symbol of my success, but lately it had become a mausoleum of lies. It was where Zoe had drugged me. It was where Gavin had plotted my death. I walked through the halls one last time. I looked at the expensive art on the walls and the silk drapes. I felt nothing, no nostalgia, no regret. It was just a pile of bricks and mortar that I could trade for the safety of my people. I liquidated everything. My private investment portfolio, the vacation home in Aspen, the vintage car collection. I poured every cent of my personal wealth back into Barnes Logistics. I paid off the predatory loans Gavin had taken. I set up a fund to pay for the environmental cleanup of the quarry. I made sure that every driver got their pension back with interest. When the dust settled, I was no longer a billionaire. I wasn't even a millionaire by the standards of the people I used to socialize with. But as I signed the final check to the cleanup crew, I felt richer than I had in years. I had bought something money usually can't buy. I had bought redemption. 2 weeks later, I packed the last of my belongings into the bed of my Ford truck. I didn't need a moving van. Everything that mattered to me fit in 3 cardboard boxes. I drove away from the mansion without looking back. The gate closed behind me, locking away the ghosts of my betrayal. I turned the truck north toward the water, toward the lakefront cottage that Gavin had tried to steal. The cottage was simple. It was made of cedar and stone, and it sat right on the edge of the water where the pines met the shore. It was supposed to be a gift for Zoe, but now it was a sanctuary for me. I pulled into the driveway and saw smoke rising from the chimney. The door opened and Hattie stepped out onto the porch. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She was wearing jeans and a warm sweater. "Welcome home, Elle," she said. I had asked Hattie to come live here not as an employee, but as a companion. She had no family left after Gavin threatened her grandson, and I had no one either. We were 2 survivors of the same war. She managed the house and I managed the garden. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared trauma. Life at the lake was quiet, but it was never lonely. Every Saturday, the gravel driveway would fill up with the sound of heavy engines. Big Mike would park his rig on the main road and walk down carrying a cooler full of steaks. Sarah would bring her famous potato salad. The drivers of Barnes Logistics adopted the cottage as their unofficial clubhouse. We would light the grill on the deck. The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce would mix with the scent of pine needles. We didn't talk about stock prices or quarterly projections. We talked about football. We talked about the road. We laughed until our sides hurt. I sat in my rocking chair one evening watching them. Mike was teaching Hattie's grandson how to throw a football by the water. Sarah was helping Hattie marinate the ribs. These people weren't related to me by blood. They didn't share my DNA, but they were more family than Zoe had ever been. They had stood by me when I had nothing but a crazy story and a rusty truck. They had formed a wall of steel to protect me. I realized then that family isn't something you are born into. It is something you build. It is like a house. You have to lay the foundation with trust, and you have to maintain it with loyalty. Zoe and Gavin had tried to burn my house down, but they didn't realize that the foundation was made of something fireproof. I took a sip of my iced tea. It was sweet and cold. For the first time in months, I didn't have to check the glass for a blue residue. I didn't have to worry if the person handing it to me wanted me dead. I was safe. As the sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of gold and violet, I excused myself and went into my small study. I sat down at the oak desk that looked out over the water. I pulled a fresh sheet of legal paper from the drawer. It was time for the final task. I took out my pen. It was a simple ballpoint, not the gold Mont Blanc I had snapped in half at the gala. I began to write. Last will and testament of Eldridge Barnes. I wrote steadily, my hand firm and sure. The legal language came easily to me now. I revoked all previous wills. I explicitly disinherited Zoe Mercer and any offspring she might have. It was a hard sentence to write, but it was necessary. She had made her choice in that diner, and she was now living with the consequences in a federal prison cell. I moved to the next paragraph. The distribution of assets. I didn't have a fortune anymore, but the company was profitable again. I owned 100% of the shares. I hereby bequeath the entirety of Barnes Logistics to the Barnes Scholarship and Pension Trust. I paused and looked out the window. The trust would be managed by a board elected by the drivers. The profits would go to two places. First, to ensure a dignified retirement for every employee, and second, to provide full college scholarships for the children of any truck driver in the state. I wanted to make sure that no child of the road ever felt like they had to steal to get ahead. I wanted to give them the chance that I had to fight for. I signed my name at the bottom. Eldridge Barnes. The signature was bold and looping. It wasn't the shaky scrawl of the drugged old man they had tried to create. It was the signature of the founder. I put the pen down. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The circle was closed. The legacy was secure. It wasn't a legacy of wealth or buildings named after me. It was a legacy of opportunity. Hattie knocked softly on the doorframe. "Dinner is ready, Elle," she said. "Mike burned the corn again, but the ribs look good." I smiled. "I will be right there, Hattie." I stood up and folded the will, placing it in the envelope. I would mail it to Arthur Banks in the morning. But for now, there was barbecue to eat and friends to talk to. I walked out of the study and onto the porch. The cool evening air filled my lungs. I looked at the lake, reflecting the stars. I thought about Martha. I hoped she was watching. I hoped she was proud. I had lost the family we made, but I had saved the family we chose. I picked up my glass of tea and raised it to the sky. To the road, I whispered. I drank. The tea tasted of lemon and honey. It tasted of life. I was 71 years old. I had been poisoned, betrayed, and left for dead. But as I walked down the steps to join my friends, I knew one thing for certain. I was just getting started. I learned that family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins, but by whose hand holds yours when the storm hits. I spent 40 years building a legacy for a daughter who viewed me as a liability, only to discover that my true heirs were the men and women with grease on their hands and loyalty in their hearts. Money can buy houses, but it cannot buy a home. And to anyone out there feeling old, invisible, or used, you are not done. You are not a burden. You are a force of nature. Never let anyone sign your life away. Pick up the pen and write your own ending. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to choose between protecting your family and protecting the truth? I read every single one. See you in the next story.